Ah, Christmas. Another time where I have to kill myself for 25 days and make you guys 25 videos. I'm not complaining though. I really enjoy making these videos for you guys, and I hope truly that you enjoy watching these. The end of the year is coming up soon, and with all the new gifts coming out and the presents that everyone's going to get or received from our loved ones, this is one of those lists that will show you the games that you will never ever get. Be they games that were unreleased either because they were canceled or they just never saw any sort of overseas production, these are the games that either you missed out on or you'll just never receive ever in your life. Starting off with something that I actually wanted to talk about last year but just never got around to it is the Nintendo peripheral called the Saddle View. Now, the Saddle View, again, was supposed to be covered last year, but I ended up squashing that video entirely in order to save up on other canceled games I thought were more interesting. And besides, everybody's either already talked about the Saddle View, and also the 64DD was something I also covered, so it just seemed like there wasn't enough room for that. But this year, it's different. If you don't know anything about the 64DD, well, just check out my old video on that, but these two are pretty similar. They were both very innovative for the time. Both were also very overly ambitious, and both were exclusive to Japan. However, unlike the 64DD, which is a too little, too late situation that just got canceled about 2 years later, the Saddle View proved to be far more successful and had a ton more games included. And these weren't just weirdo games like Doshin the Giant, these were massive first-party made games like Legend of Zelda BS Fire Emblem, and other crap that was made by other third-party developers. But before we actually get into that jazz, let's talk about what exactly the system is. Well, as stated earlier, the Saddle View was a satellite peripheral exclusive to Japan, and it's a joint collaboration between satellite radio station St. Giga. St. Giga was responsible with server management and maintenance, while Nintendo developed the games for the peripheral. The Saddle View was released in Japan in April 24th, 1995, but pre-orders began around the 13th of February, and man was this bitch expensive. The Saddle View alone was 14,000 to 18,000 yen, or just about $140 to $180 US. Not only did you need the Saddle View system, but users would also need a BS tuner and a BS satellite. But this was already given to previous St. Giga subscribers, so it wasn't really that costly if you had already been a customer. But for those of you who are going to jump in, it was going to be a very costly investment, as it was nearly 33,000 yen, or roughly $300 US, just to get the BS tuner and satellite. Users could also just rent the BS tuner alone for 6 months at the significantly lower price of 5,400 yen, or just about $50 a month. Yet in order to actually play the Saddle View, you needed a Super Famicom, which of course was around $200 or $250. So add that all up, and just to play the Saddle View alone would just cost like more than $750. That's not even including the constant subscription fee you would need to pay in order to broadcast the Saddle View. Jesus Christ, screaming in agony on the cross, that's nuts. But was it worth it? Well, apparently for most households, yeah, it kind of was. See, despite its cost, St. Giga reported to have over 115,000 subscribers during its peak years, and dipping down to about 50,000 in 2000. That's not too bad considering the price and that the GameCube had already just released by this point. I mean, it's certainly better than what the 64DD did, which was way worse. So what about it was worth the price? Well, as stated earlier, there was exclusive games made for the Saddle View that could only be played on the Saddle View. There were no other ways to play certain games like BS Zelda, BS Fire Emblem, the Mario Weekly challenges they had, Dynamite Tracer, which was apparently this saga made by Square Enix that was just this whole compact story, and a whole slew of other games made by various developers and for the Saddle View exclusively. Now, there were other games you could play in the Saddle View, but these exclusive games, I mean, they were definitely a hook. Exclusive games made by Nintendo, only you could play, games that were radio broadcasted to you alone, and you had to tune in. It had high quality audio. I mean, that was insane. But don't you think that you'll be playing any games you want whenever you wanted? I need you to understand that this wasn't some streaming service. There was no such thing like that in the past, and even if it did exist, it was probably very costly and probably impossible to make it mainstream and affordable. The only way you could play these games is if you were on time, because much like TV stations, you'd have to tune in certain times in order to play these games. So if you wanted to play BS Fire Emblem, for example, then you'd better make sure you were available from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Saturday nights. Otherwise, you wouldn't be playing it ever again, or until next week, or whenever they had their schedules. You know, you had to rely on them alone, meaning you only had a few tries in order to play the game that month. Otherwise, it's just gone for good. Now, unfortunately, because of the Satellaview's weird schedule where you had to play certain games at certain times, it made things a bit difficult to preserve these games for the future. Yes, you can totally play these games on emulators, but some of these games made for the peripheral are just lost forever. And what's more is that Satellaview did more than just games. They also did broadcast certain magazines through Satellaview, and they did something called the Sound Link. Essentially, this made it possible for people to hear special high-quality audio, like remade orchestrated versions or video game music, or there was even high-quality voice acting for certain games for the Satellaview. It's a little hard to describe and to imagine, but there were also voices that would read narrations for certain games at certain times, making the streamed games more like a live radio drama. There would also be people that would read off of the magazines in the Satellaview. Whenever you downloaded the magazines, there would be sound files that would read off of it, and it would almost resemble something like a podcast. The full experience of the Satellaview can never really fully be realized, as it seems like some of the sound links are just lost forever. Sure, you can play BS Zelda, but you'll never actually be able to hear the live voice acting or the live narrations. It's lost to time and it can't ever be retrieved. It's also worth noting that even with the sound links that are available, some of them hold unique properties to them that make it more difficult to emulate, such as the BS Zelda Overworld remake apparently having cavalry sound effects in the background being played randomly each time it was being broadcasted. So unless someone saved every single broadcast, we'll just never really know how each one sounded like. It also doesn't help that a lot of the content was broadcasted through the Satellaview while you play the game. So while yes, there are sound links that are forever lost in time, there's also stuff like the Satellaview BIOS that is also lost to time itself. See, the Satellaview had this BIOS thing that was essentially like a glorified, more fleshed out version of the GameCube spinning around the cube thing. You know how you used to play around with that? Yeah, well, it's kind of like that, except it was its own content, its own game. It was called The Town That Had Its Name Stolen. It had a ton of content that made itself appear whenever you open up the BIOS at a certain time of day or week or holiday. It resembled an Earthbound clone that had you playing around town, and I'm assuming had you solving the mystery of who stole the town's name and what the name was. Yet because of the fact that the Satellaview is obviously no longer being supported, there's no way to actually see what the town that had its name stolen really was. A ROM can only go so far, and there's no possible way to stream this stuff with St. Giga, of course. So that too, and many other games that are similarly broadcasting data through St. Giga are now lost forever. Now, I could go on and on about other games that were shown, the weird little menu system, or the sound links and special broadcasts and contests Satellaview occasionally had, but I won't, because the main topic of this video was about the Satellaview and the quirky little secrets and things that made it unique. I mean, as annoying as it was to play these games during certain times of the day and week, and as annoying as it was to download these games every few minutes because of anti-piracy measures, yeah, that was a thing, Nintendo had truly a unique peripheral on their hands here. There is nothing like this thing that's ever existed since then. I mean, obviously it wouldn't have, because the next evolution of this broadcasting radio stuff was streaming services, and streaming services are king. And the idea of waiting for a certain game to come out by the end of the day or a certain time of the month seems a bit pointless, as you could just play whenever and whatever you wanted. The technology has evolved, definitely. Doing this sort of stuff is possible and far more easier, but god damn, this is still my absolute favorite weird thing Nintendo has ever developed. Now, if you want to hear me talk more about the certain Saddle of You games for this month, please let me know. There are a ton of interesting little games that were for this system. I mean, did you know that there was a technical sequel for Chrono Trigger made for this game? It was more like a visual novel, but if you're interested in that lore and if you want to explore more about that, then you gotta know that that existed. But right now, I think I've quenched my Saddle of You thirst for now. Maybe someday I'll dive a little deeper. Until then, thank you so much for watching. Look out for more videos coming out this month. I'll see you all next time. Love you guys so much. Goodbye. Chrono Trigger is possibly the greatest game ever made. And that's no hyperbole either. Everyone seems to agree with that. Be it the structure of the narrative, the active and fun gameplay, the charming characters, the amazing story with multiple endings, the wonderful world to explore, the fantastic, memorable music, or any other multitude of reasons, the game is loved by all. Now, fast forward a couple of years, while still riding on the coattails of the success of Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross was soon developed and released for the PS1. Now, Chrono Cross is a very polarized game. Some people really love it and consider it a masterpiece just as Chrono Trigger was, yet others say it's an inferior sequel to an otherwise perfect game, and some people just flat out hate it. Then even more years pass by, and after many squashed fan games and fan sequels, many people seem to have forgotten about this series. Not a lot of people seem to talk about Chrono Trigger anymore, or its short-lived franchise. Nobody's asking for Chrono to be in Smash anymore, nobody's asking for a remake, and nobody really cares. I mean, that is a hyperbole. I know that there's obviously people out there who are die-hard, eat, shit, and breathe Chrono Trigger fans without a doubt, but the demand has dwindled. Part of that has to do with Square's lack of interest as well. Face it, the Chrono Trigger series is done for, and we will most likely never get a new Chrono game anytime soon, and while that is very depressing for those clamoring for a new game, I'd like to tell you Chrono Trigger fans out there that there may be a game that you've been neglecting all this time and you might not even know about. It's called Radical Dreamers, and it's a visual novel that was released for the Satellaview and acts as a sort of sequel slash side story to Chrono Trigger. It follows the adventures of Surge, a traveling musician, Kid, a Robin Hood-esque teenage girl, and Magile, a handsome, enigmatic masked magician that can fade into shadows at will. Together, this merry band of heroes set off to retrieve the Frozen Flame, which is said to be an ancient and powerful artifact that can grant any wish. And if you're a Chrono Trigger fan, the Frozen Flame would sound very familiar, as it is a very key part of the Chrono Trigger story. In Radical Dreamers, the Frozen Flame currently resides within the Viper Manor, the home to a very powerful aristocrat known as Lynx, who now rules over the estate after defeating a band of warriors known as the Acacia Dragoons. Now, if anyone out there is expecting a fantastical, magnificent adventure across the world with action-packed RPG systems and music by Nobuo Uematsu, well, tough luck. The game is a visual novel, meaning everything about the story was majorly text-based, and even with the little combat that does exist is told through complex text-based choices that flat out describe what you should do. Other than the background, there are no moving sprites. Unless you're into text-based adventures or visual novels, you probably won't find this game very enjoyable, and even if you are into the lore or story of Chrono Trigger, there's a possibility that you won't enjoy the story, as the dude who directed and wrote the game isn't very proud of what he made at all. When Chrono Trigger was being re-released for the PS1, the devs wanted to add the game as a sort of Easter egg, but Masato Kato, the writer of the game, refused to have it in the game as he was ashamed of what he had created. Well, maybe ashamed is a bit harsh. More like he felt that it was unfinished and wasn't worthy of actually re-putting it back into this game. Thankfully, some dedicated fans have translated the entirety of Radical Dreamer, so it is available to anyone with a SNES emulator and the ROM itself. I have read the game myself, just a portion of it anyways, and I think it's structurally well written, well described, and the story really does read out like a fully realized novel. Although whether the story is good or not, well, I think that's up to you to decide if you are a fan of Chrono Trigger. I can say that the story was alright from what I read, but really it's up to you to figure out whether or not it's a a bad Chrono Trigger sequel. And I think the visuals for this game, as limited as they are actually really pretty to look at. Like, the sprites are very well made and very well animated. And also, I think the story narrative, the way that it is told and the choices that you make, really make it feel impactful, as this game has 3 endings, and once you beat the game, you can have 6 more additional endings that are more comedic in nature. And combat, again, even though it is not as deep as it would be in Chrono Trigger with its RPG system, it is very well described, and each move you make, each decision you choose has an impact on the combat itself. And it also acts as a sort of active timer. If you don't make a choice quickly, you will be hurt with this invisible health bar that can be healed occasionally through story narrative moments. Depending on how well you do the combat and how well you defeat enemies, your relationship with Kid will evolve gradually, and you will soon turn her into a love interest, leading to one of the endings where you might survive the encounter at the end. Now, I'm not totally familiar with visual novels or the history of them, but for 1996, this game must have seemed pretty innovative with the choices that you make and how they would have been fleshed out more in the future if you made the right decisions or the wrong ones, and how there are multiple endings attached to this very short story that definitely makes it worth repeating over and over just to see every ending, even the additional endings that were added after you beat the game. But again, I can see how this is very unattractive to some people, because if you grew up with Chrono Trigger, you wanted an epic RPG battle system, a visually appealing game, a game where you could control your adventure, you can go anywhere you want instead of being stuck with text that describes where you go, and what you see, and what you do. That's not really something Chrono Trigger fans, I think, want. But if you're a diehard and you're dying for some content, I mean, this is definitely something for you. Although it is clear where the inspiration of Chrono Cross came from, as the characters Surge and Kid both reappear in the game, and while Magile does not appear in Chrono Cross, there is a character that resembles him in both character design and role, named Guile. He even has the blue hair, which is something Magile also has, and Lynx also returns as the main antagonist. Actually, quick spoiler, and this is a spoiler for Radical Dreamers, not for the other games. It is proven within the game itself that Magile is Magus, and it is widely speculated and believed that the character in Chrono Cross, Guile, is Magus in disguise. Further showing the connection between Radical Dreamers and Chrono Cross, how many of the ideas were just straight up lifted and taken away from Radical Dreamers just to be put into Chrono Cross, except it's more fully fleshed out. And I'm not too familiar with Chrono Cross, so I can't really say if this story is related or a direct prequel to Chrono Cross, or if it's like some weird timeline thing. I don't know. So if anyone out there can help me out, that'd be well appreciated. Just leave a comment down below. Unfortunately, while the game itself will most likely never see the light of day anytime soon, it is at least interesting knowing that there was a sequel to Chrono Trigger just about a year after its release. Thankfully, someone out there was able to save this game on the Satellaview and upload it online, so it's no longer lost to time, unlike most other unfortunate Satellaview games. But then again, Radical Dreamers was one of those few games that didn't actually have a time limit or a limit itself on how many times you played the game, making it one of the few exclusive Satellaview games that allowed you to play whenever you wanted, even after St. Giga pulled the plug. Oh well. We may never see a new Chrono series game for a very long time, for as long as we live even. But if this is something you never knew about, well, here's your chance to delve into the world of Chrono Trigger all over again. Because you might not ever get anything else. Damn. Wow, who would have thought that a Bill Cosby special in the year 2014 would have been canceled? I wonder why we'll never see Bill Cosby's special on Netflix. Oh boy, oh boy. Ah, man, I don't even know how to start this at all. Like, seriously, I really don't. Okay, so, Jesus, I seriously, I legit don't know how to start. So Bill Cosby is this legendary comedian, considered the king of TV comedy, beloved by all, a hero to some, and overall a pretty funny dude if you saw any of his stand-ups. Even in his later years, Bill Cosby proved that he still got it. He still got those roofies in his pocket. God damn it, Bill, get rid of the evidence, you stupid mother... Oh right, that unfortunate thing that happened in his career. All the allegations and terrible things. Yeah, I guess the one thing bad about Bill Cosby is that He's Bill Cosby. No, but in all seriousness, I think it's inappropriate for me to talk about the horrible things that Bill Cosby has done. I think we're all fully aware of the atrocities he's committed and the suffering he's caused. And if you really don't know about it, I recommend checking out any documentary made on him after the year 2014, when most of his victims stood up against him and made the claims that brought to light the sort of monster he truly is. Or you could just wait a few months till the next victim of Cosby stands up and reports another allegation. No joke, there are still new allegations, the most recent one being in 2018, and I'm sure there's more to come. Now, understanding this controversy is what leads us to understand why exactly Cosby 77, a canceled Netflix special, was canceled. See, there's no footage of Cosby 77, like, at all. Essentially, it was a comedy stand-up special filmed around 2014, before most of the major allegations were made, and it was filmed on his 77th birthday. This special was hosted at the San Francisco Jazz Center and had a runtime of 60 minutes. The way it was talked about during some production interviews made it seem like most, if not all, of the editing was already finished and was set to release on November 28th. Yet, as November came, so too did new allegations against Bill Cosby and the ever-growing list of victims. Hours after Janice Dixon publicly claimed to be a victim of Bill's, Netflix made the announcement that they delayed the special indefinitely. Netflix didn't officially say why at the time they delayed the special, but it can be assumed that, well, 2014 wasn't really Bill's luckiest year, ironically enough. Yet a few months after the special was delayed, oh boy, what a scumbag, Ted Sarandos, the chief content officer, later stated that it wasn't appropriate to release the special, not because of the allegations, but because it'd be in the middle of the holidays. Wow. He even said that the decision to not release the special was tragic. Wow, what an asshole. Finally, in July, it was announced that the special would not be released to audiences. Now, what makes Cosby 77 interesting, other than this possibly being Bill Cosby's final special he could ever air, is the fact that Cosby 77 just doesn't have any footage whatsoever. It was filmed in front of a live audience, and I'm sure the film was finished, yet there are no trailers, nor screenshots, nor anything whatsoever of the film at all. They probably never released a trailer as a way to avoid controversy, what with the allegations starting to pile up higher and higher, and Dixon being the straw that broke the old horny man's back. We will most likely never see the Cosby 77 special for as long as we or he lives, and that's fine. Honestly, it's one of the few times I can say on Boosemas that I'm happy something wasn't released, because I don't think there's any reason, any appropriate reason whatsoever to release the special. Even if you're a die-hard Bill Cosby fan, like, there is a boundary and there is respect that needs to be upheld, and there's no point to give him this when he's already caused so much suffering. And I'll just leave it at that, because this is a pretty dark episode, and yeah, Merry Christmas! When I was younger, the most epic game I have ever played was World of Warcraft. That game was full of mystery, adventure, companionship, dungeons, loot, fantasy tropes that weren't totally boring. Yeah, it had it all, and I was enthralled by the world. I enjoyed the game around the time that Burning Crusade, the game's first expansion, was released. It was still relatively new, and I even got to witness my cousin have his game crash a few times as he entered the gates of Outlands, and it was just a very memorable moment. I was instantly signing up to that shit, and now trying to catch up with my cousins while still in school proved to be a bit difficult. This is old school World of Warcraft. Leveling was a difficult task, and I'd sometimes play for days and not even get up by 2 levels. Eventually, I was able to catch up, but it was around this point that the Black Temple was released and Illidan had already been defeated. The last raid of the expansion, Sunwell Plateau, was right around the corner, and people were already speculating on what the next expansion could be. Some listed off some usual suspects such as Ashara, Lich King. Some even joked that maybe Pandarans would be a new race. I mean, who would ever think that would happen? Ideas are always wild when new expansions are right around the corner. But the most wild and the most popular theory was that we were going to visit the ever-elusive and ever-so-popular Emerald Dream. Now, what the hell is the Emerald Dream, and why do people think we'd go there? And why was there so much footage of this weird place when the expansion never came out, even now, 15 years later? Well, to answer the first question, the Emerald Dream acts as a sort of blueprint used by the Titans, which is layman's terms as these like godlike beings that forge worlds and create life in the lore. When making Azeroth, that is the world you inhabit in this game, they use the Emerald Dream to plan out how to create life. But what actually is it? It's basically this just vast green Pangea-like continent that's uninhabited by any wildlife or any mortals for that matter. It's untouched and unspoiled by anything. Keep this in mind, as it'll basically be the bullet that went through Blizzard's foot when they inevitably shoot themselves. The Emerald Dream was a mythical place. It was deep and rich with lore, and it was kind of obvious that the next expansion was going to be in the Emerald Dream. It's not only because it was such a lore important place, but also there was footage going around YouTube of these people that were seemingly exploring this random zone that has never existed in the game before. It was basically people that were glitching, quote unquote, through the game files and just suddenly appear in the Emerald Dream. These videos were a mystery, and it misled some people into thinking that they could just jump over a certain area around Mount Hyjal and then boom, they're suddenly in the Emerald Dream. These videos were very convincing back in the day, but nowadays it's pretty obvious that they were edited or spliced together to bring out the illusion that they were legit ways to get into the Emerald Dream, which does exist in the game's files, but there's no way actually to visit the place. Usually these videos were created by people who made private servers and had access to all sorts of dev kits in order to get into the Emerald Dream. Eventually, when the Lich King did come out, these videos became far more rampant and more people became interested in visiting the Emerald Dream. Sadly, there is no real way to get into the Emerald Dream legitimately. But while there is no legitimate way to get into the Emerald Dream, that doesn't mean that the Emerald Dream itself doesn't exist, because it does. These are legit zones that, if possible, you can explore, and they're massive, honestly. This is obviously indicating that there was a plan to implement the Emerald Dream into the game. What you can find is a huge leftover massive landscape full of weird trees and bizarre valleys, at least for a moment, as the forest eventually turns into a very green, barren wasteland. Now, it's currently unknown just what Blizzard was going to do with this data. Through some interviews, it was speculated that druids in-game were going to have some sort of small zone connected to the Emerald Dream, as canonically druids do have an affinity for the Emerald Dream and have always, lore-wise anyways, been able to travel in between this world and the Emerald Dream whenever they wanted. Yet this was never actually implemented. That is until Legion, but we'll get to that in a bit. Then there are other interviews where it was implied to be a high-level questing zone. Keep in mind, when Vanilla WoW was released, there were barely any endgame content for high-level people. There was so little endgame content, in fact, that the questing just stopped around level 58. Like, literally, there were no quests for levels 58 and above, so it would make sense that the Emerald Dream be that kind of endgame content for those people yearning for any way to level up other than grinding mobs. This is further amplified when you consider the fact that there were portals around Azeroth that really do nothing at all, honestly, but were speculated to be a portal to the Emerald Dream. Yet when they were dropped into the live game, these portals only served as a static, inconsequential looking piece of terrain. I mean, it served a narrative purpose, sure, as the Dragons of Nightmares came from those portals, but they didn't do anything else. So it's speculated since Vanilla that we'd someday be able to traverse into this mysterious zone that Blizzard seemingly forgot. And expansion after expansion later, people always brought up the possibility of going to the Emerald Dream. Yet as time passed, nobody really cared about it anymore. It suddenly became a myth for people. It was just reduced to nothing more than a mere meme. Yet, not all hope is lost. The latest expansion have connected people to the Emerald Dream, albeit as an instance rather than full-fledged zones. And if you're new to WoW or you don't really know what an instance is, basically it's just one small part of the game, a zone that's cut off from the rest of the main game and landscape, more or less. So we have places like the Dream Grove, this area that druids can teleport to whenever they want, and then we have the Emerald Nightmare, which is basically just the Emerald Dream, only corrupted by the Burning Legion. Once you complete the Emerald Nightmare raid, you get to see the Emerald Dream restored, and you get to see a very small portion of the Emerald Dream to explore. Funny enough, as if to taunt the players, you can see some of the old assets from the old Emerald Dream zone used used in this zone. So with all the teasing and small glimpses into the Emerald Dream, will the expansion ever come out? Can we expect players to finally explore the forests and canyons of the Emerald Dream? Well, not likely. See, all this teasing does imply that the Emerald Dream does have a much deeper use in the Warcraft storyline, but I really doubt that the Emerald Dream could ever fully flourish into a fun, scalable zone. I say that because of one tiny little issue. The Emerald Dream is a pristine version of the world, untouched by man, beast, orc, or whatever. It's nature at its purest form, with only plant life taking over and ruling the lands. There's nothing good or evil about the zone, so tainting the zone with people, adventurers, citadels, I mean, that's just not what the Emerald Dream is, lore-wise, and gameplay-wise, it wouldn't be very fun to explore either. If you really want the Emerald Dream, I mean, technically we already got the Emerald Dream, like over 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. It's right here. It's green, barren, and really not that fascinating. Story-wise, I don't really see any reason to go back to the Emerald Dream either. There's a few things you can use it for the story, sure, but right now with the focus on Sylvanas, the possibility of the World of Warcraft ending soon, I mean, the Burning Legion is gone. I mean, those were the big baddies for the longest time, and they're just gone. Hell, even Ashara, another big baddie, is just done for. So really, what purpose does Blizzard have going to the Emerald Dream, aside for a few quests or instances? Not really much reason, honestly. Unless, of course, they have something here that I'm missing. I don't know, I haven't kept up with the lore since Pandaria, maybe. So, leave a comment down below if you think that we'll go to the Emerald Dream anytime soon for, like, lore reasons. But for now, I think I'm done. I'm content knowing that my druid at least could have fun all he wants in the Dream Grove, because I know fully well that that is a portion of the Emerald Dream. And honestly, the fact that I can stand there now in a place where I could never travel 10 years ago, that's like a dream come true. Pokemon has now officially reached 888 Pokemon with the release of Sword and Shield, and it'll most likely reach over 1,000 by the time the 10th generation comes out. And with so many Pokemon on the loose and a ton of merch being sold, tell me, do you ever wonder what kind of Pokemon never made the cut? There have been hundreds, right? Well, as of this recording, there have been dozens of Pokemon uncovered from the cutting room floor. Many of these Pokemon either only appearing in official artwork, various art books, some books that were released recently, or just through the beta versions of these games. Either way, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the Pokemon that were unfortunately, or maybe in some cases fortunately, cut out of the main franchise. First up is the Capsule Monsters designs, which, if you're not aware, is just what Pokemon was originally. You'd store Pokemon, or rather monsters, in your capsules, as opposed to balls, kind of like Capsule Corp in the original Dragon Ball series, only with monsters. Also, as a side note, trainers weren't called trainers, but they were beast tamers, and they would use whips to control their monsters. Wow, that wouldn't have been controversial at all. The few that were designed, or at least the ones that were found, were notably lackluster. I mean, they're just really uninspired, but that's probably not because of the fact that they were final designs or anything, but just pre-alpha level design. So more likely they were just designed in order to be a proof of concept so that the art team can fully flesh them out. So we get stuff like this, which has the same Pokedex number as Jinx, but also shares one with Caterpie. It doesn't really resemble anything, but I'm just going to say it ended up being Caterpie. Then we got the possible pre-alpha version of Quillfish, a humorous mock battle screen featuring a hat-wearing King Kong sprite fighting a Godzilla-esque Pokemon, both named Gorillaimo and Godzillante, respectively. Then we get this interesting screenshot showing in more detail what Capsule Monsters was going to be before eventually becoming Pokemon. Translated, we can see that there are some interesting new stats, such as the TP meter and intelligence stat, and gold as currency. Moving on, we also have this large sprite sheet featuring a plethora of Pokemon that were not included in the final game. Apparently, Satoshi Tajiri revealed in his educational manga, The Man Who Created Pokemon, that Pokemon all went through a sort of voting period where the staff would vote for their favorite Pokemon and include the ones that were highly voted. So many of these Pokemon, while probably making it far into the development period, well, as far as they could go before eventually getting canned, most likely got crushed because the staff just didn't like them. That's why mixed in with these weirdo Pokemon you've never seen before are some familiar faces like Rhydon, Execute, Lickitung, Nidoking, Nidoqueen, Voltorb, Slowbro, etc. But then there's some weird ones like maybe Ivysaur and Venusaur, then possibly Gengar.
You know what? I love myself. Even though I look like a burnt chicken nugget, I still love myself.
Among these are the ones that are nearly impossible to identify though, possibly because they were never released. My favorite one is this little terrifying space creature. By God, that is so weird. Also, there's this little Spyro Scyther hybrid, which, I don't know, I just like him. This one also ended up probably being Arcanine, but I don't know, there's no more detail about him anyways. But I like me some big poofy woofer, so I like him a lot. There's also these humorous little drawings of what may have ended up being Snorlax, but it could have just ended up being a concept sketch and someone added what I'm assuming one of the dev team members. Some say it's Koji Nishino, and he is one of the old school programmers, so it's very likely that it's just him. Now we get into the stuff that I'm sure you all know about by now. As mentioned previously, Satoshi Tajiri's book revealed a ton about the history of Pokemon, and amongst them were unused assets or Pokemon that never saw the light of day. Some of these are kind of cool looking, like this stag thing with an insectoid body, I don't know. And others looked... oh, good God. But there's not really much to say that other people haven't already said. There are some Pokemon that were described or talked about or seen in the game's files that just never had any sort of art associated with them at all, like the infamous Gorochu that was said to be Raichu's evolution. Nothing ever came out of this Pokemon, as it was apparently going to just cause game balance issues, which, I mean, there were a ton already, so I guess they just wanted to prevent more bullshit from happening. Apparently, there was also a bunny with a flower on its nose that never saw even concept art, and a Mega Flygon that unfortunately was never released. Actually, can I be real with you for a second? I honestly, while I was researching this, I could have sworn there already was a Mega Flygon. Legit, I really thought there was, I thought that was a thing. I even remember seeing a Mega Flygon transform in X and Y. I'm legit going through like a Mandela effect moment here. I swear, I thought Mega Flygon was a thing. I'm pretty sure there was, but there's not? Huh. We can also blaze on through some Pokemon that did make it into the game, but were just redesigned. Okay, so like Weedle is apparently this thing, and this is apparently Kakuna. This was labeled as undecided by Game Freak on their website, but ended up being Beedrill, though some compare it to Ledion. This is Spearow. This is Clefairy. This, if you can believe it, is Seal. This is Dragonair. This is Meryl, aka Peekaboo. Now, some of these were also pretty interesting with their previous designs. Girafaridge, or Girafaridge, I don't know how to say the name, was a Pokemon I always thought was really freaky because of its smiling tail, but probably not as freaky as its previous incarnation of just having two halves of a giraffe gorilla glued together. Good lord. This one has to be the worst Pokemon design I've ever seen. I think we all know about this one. It's Suicune and Raikou combined to make this absolute shit. This is the worst fusion dance I've ever seen. Also, Blackface Blossom.
This is something that I deeply, deeply regret. Darkening your face, regardless of the context or the circumstances, is always unacceptable because of the racist history of blackface. I should have understood that then. And
then we have this weird Pokemon that nobody's ever seen before, but widely speculated to be the worst Pokemon ever, Dreidel Boy. Also, Parachute Jeans, Anoladias, and Blackface Blossom.
I take responsibility for my decision to do that. I shouldn't have done it. I should have known better. It was something that...
The last Pokemon I wanted to end on were these huge, just massive info dumps that just came from the beta versions of the second gen. Apparently, in Nintendo Space World 1997, there was a beta for the latest Pokemon game coming out, Gold and Silver, and anyone who got their hands on it reportedly saw over 40 Pokemon that were inevitably scrapped from the final release, yet was in the beta version of the game. These Pokemon included the Fire Starter and Water Starter lineup that never saw the light of day, but also unevolved versions of Meowth, Vulpix, Paris, and a bunch of other Pokemon Pokemon. Completely different designs for Pokemon like Pichu and Entei and 25 other Pokemon, and apparently somehow someone got a hold of 4 ROM images of the game that were promptly leaked during the presentation. 2 versions that worked on normal Game Boys and 2 that were debugged versions. For the longest time, it was just believed to be rumors, but eventually someone online posted download links to these ROMs. This all happened in 2018, and it led to a wealth of unreleased info being spread out to the world. This now gives us a clear image on what the Pokemon looked like before final release, and not just that, but old sprite work that was otherwise unused. You can find more info on the Cutting Room Floor website, which I'll leave linked in the description, but I wanted to focus on a few notable entries. Here we have Bayleaf. Yeah, seriously, I bet you wouldn't have said that if you didn't know that this was Bayleaf. It's a pretty drastic change from the final design, but honestly, I prefer this over what we got. I'm just not a big fan of Chikorita's evolutions, to be honest. Next up, we got the starters we saw, but this time in color: Honoguma, Borubea, and Dynabear. I really love these. Again, I just really prefer them over Cyndaquil, which I just never really liked, or his evolutions. And these guys, I absolutely adore. Fucking Fire Bear, are you kidding me? That's awesome. Kurusu, Aqua, and Aquaria. This is basically just Popo and Popio, whatever his fucking name is, and his line of evolutions, and I just like them way more. Like the Popio ones, not this one. I'm just happy that we have Totodile instead than this, because this one doesn't look that great. Noctowl looks super different, real sleek. I kind of dig it. Mikon is probably the first of many pre-evolutions that never made it, and it's the pre-evolution of Vulpix. It's really cute, and I really love Vulpix, so I'm kind of sad that it never happened, that this Pokemon was released. I would have loved to have seen it. But weirdly enough, the interesting thing about this Pokemon is that it's listed as a water type, when clearly the color scheme and the fact that it belongs to Vulpix should have been fire type. Maybe this was a mistake, but I can't help but feel that maybe Game Freak wanted to do something weird with typings during Gen 2. Maybe have Pokemon lose certain types as they evolve, just like Eevee, though that might have caused some issues down the line. Manja and Jaranra apparently being pre-evolutions and evolutions of Tangela respectively. Tangela has always seemed like this underappreciated Pokemon, so it would have been nice to get more love out of him, but sadly that didn't happen until the 4th gen. Here's Pichu. Manbu, Ikari, and Gurotesu, an evolution line of Pokemon that just never saw the light of day, though I will say I love Ikari's design. This whole half shark, half anchor Pokemon, like, that's really cool, and the water steel typing, it's also pretty cool, though its last evolution is kind of shitty. I mean, its name does translate to grotesque, so yeah. Baby Paris. Aww. Animon. Oh my god, it's Ditto's older brother / evolution. Apparently it's more metallic. I'm not really sure why Ditto would even need an evolution, and it still stays as a normal type. Whatever. Baby Doduo. Why has it got 3 heads? What happened to the 3rd? Oh my god. This one's really cool. Its name is Suinzu, and it's apparently the pre-evolution to Girafarig. It's a dark normal type, and I can't find really any reason why they wouldn't add this Pokemon. Probably because Girafarig ended up being a normal psychic type. But, I mean, my biggest peeve has always been that certain Pokemon don't have pre-evolutions. I'm looking at you, Kangaskhan. Knowing that so many of these Pokemon have pre-evolutions, and that they were going to be added, they even have their own sprites, it's really disheartening for me, especially since a lot of them are so cute or just really cool. Some of these are just really baffling. I don't know why they wouldn't have added it. Like, look at this one. Pre-evolution Meowth. Aww. Please, oh my fucking god, that is so cute. Why, Lord, why did they scrap this? This is the cutest motherfucker, oh my god. Rinrin and Berudun, dark type Pokemon cats that are only female. Kind of weird that they didn't add her, as they made dark type Pokemon in this generation to combat against psychic types being overpowered in Gen 1, yet a lot of dark types were just scrapped, it seems. It's a shame, because this Pokemon is cute. Like, it's really adorable. Here's Baby Ponyta. Weirdly enough, it's a normal type. Again, going back to my theory of like Game Freak wanting to experiment with losing typings as the Pokemon evolved. Taban, which is just Slowbro Shell, which is like, that is a childhood dream. Do you know how many times I looked at that tail? I'm like, how is that not its own Pokemon? Why didn't they add him? I understand that it's supposed to be a Shelder that evolved with Slowbro, but that never made sense to me, honestly, because all he does is just stand up. It's not like he grows wings. He just stands up. I don't know. Here's Baby Grimer. That looks really stupid, but kind of cute. It's like a melted Kirby. Here's Igor. Just kidding, it's Octillery. Tyrogue and Hitmontop look real different, and as much as I don't like Hitmontop, this design beats whatever they had going on. What the fuck? Oh my god, no way. It's a baby Growlithe. Are you kidding? Why didn't they add? Why did they cut all of these? They're so cute. Are you kidding me? This is what Hoppip looked like before they redesigned it. And to be honest, it makes more sense that its name was Haneko here, because now it looks more like a cat. I understand it also means root, but I like the more cat feline aesthetics than what we got with like a more generic looking feline-ish thing. I don't know, I just kind of like the design more. Here's Mime Jr. 16 years before he was actually released. It has a more ballerina-esque design, kind of similar to Mime Jr., but not really. And this is the sort of thing that confuses me. If eventually they wanted to come out with a Mime Jr., or rather a pre-evolution to Mr. Mime, then why scrap it now and wait like years later? Obviously they're not gonna wait. Somebody brought it up while making the Pokemon for the 6th generation, but I don't know, like, it seems kind of a waste. Here's Bart Simpson. Just kidding, it's Magme. Aren't I really funny? Please subscribe and like. Here's a water fire seal Pokemon that's named Bomushika, which has this like bomb fireball on its nose, and it's really kind of cool. This one's cool too. It's an electric tiger. Its name is Kotoro, and the evolution is Raitoro. And it's why did they cut? I don't, man. Anyways, here's Madame, which is a swan wizard-ish Pokemon. Kind of like Farfetch'd, but oh no, wait, actually it is the evolved version of Farfetch'd. Sorry, Farfetch'd, you're gonna have to wait another fucking 20 years until someone gives you an evolution. This is Porygon 2, and it looks nothing like the original Porygon 2 we actually got. Here's Lickitung's evolution, which kind of looks cool, and I kind of wish they kept it. I mean, a lot of these I wish they kept it, but this one especially. Like, I don't like Lickitung, and quite frankly, I do kind of like his other evolution that they did eventually give, but this one is kind of cool. I don't know, I enjoy it. Did you know Leafeon was supposed to be in this game also? They just didn't add Leafeon at all. Here he is. He's right there. He was supposed to be in this game, but sadly they had to wait another 10 years until they could be added to the game. This one's cool. It's a werewolf Pokemon. It evolves at level 35 into this, and it's oh man, I keep saying it's cool because I have nothing else to say. These are all really well made characters. I like them all, and there's even a Pinsir evolution that looks really nice. They just scrapped them, probably because of memory's sake, and they did have notorious amounts of issues that needed to be fixed by Satoru Iwata eventually, so that might be connected as to why so many of these Pokemon were just never added. But by God, some of these are just so amazing, and you can check out all of them. I barely scratched the surface. There's a ton, but there is 2 more that I wanted to mention. That being the Legendary 3, and of course this Pokemon, which is named Norowara. It apparently evolves at level 1, so that's weird. I have no idea what that means. I'm essentially assuming that it can level up whenever it wants to, or whenever you want it to, into this. And I don't know, that's just an interesting gameplay mechanic, a Pokemon that can just evolve whenever he wants, and its design is really cool. I've always loved the ghost type Pokemon, and the fact that this isn't in the game, it's a bummer. And finally, the last 3 Pokemon I will talk about are, of course, the Legendary 3, that is Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. All of them having these beta designs, which look not that great, to be honest. I especially love Raikou's one, which is just this emo looking like cyber dog, and then there's Suicune's, which is like an emo My Little Pony. The generic ass Entei design is not that great either. All of them look really bad, and I'm glad that they were all redesigned into what we know now. But to see all of these Pokemon, and many more, like I said, there is a ton more that I didn't cover, to see that so many of them were changed or removed, is both disheartening and relieving. Relieving because I don't want emo Suicune, but disheartening also because many of these are so good. Like, I love the werewolf Pokemon. I love the fact that there was a Growlithe pre-evolution, an evolution to Pinsir. I don't know, this ghost type Pokemon that we never heard of, this tiger electric thing that, why wasn't it released? It looks so cool. All of these are just, it's a shame that we're not going to get them. It really is. But hopefully in the future they will be released, because like I said, a lot of these Pokemon eventually did become a Pokemon later on, or were inspired for other Pokemon later on, like the Mime Jr. one. It clearly never came out for the 2nd gen, but it did come out for the 5th gen. And while there are probably hundreds of other Pokemon that we've never seen before hiding within the beta files of Pokemon games that we don't currently have access to, eventually they'll recirculate. I mean, there's only so many ideas they'll have until eventually they have to go back to the old drawing boards and draw inspiration from that. But I don't know, I'm just rambling now. This is probably the longest Boosemas episode I've ever made, and I'm really sorry for that. I'm just hoping that it was entertaining for all of you, because I've just been geeking out and fanning out over all of these weird little designs, and I'm heartbroken that we're never gonna get these. At least for now, we're not gonna get them. Anyways, please enjoy the rest of Boosemas. I promise they won't be this long anymore. Bye, guys. Rilakkuma and Karu is a cute little stop-motion animated show based off of that one bear you always see in Barnes & Noble. Now, it's quite entertaining and it gives off good vibes all around, but we ain't gonna be talking about that shit. We're gonna be talking about this horror show. Yeah. Now, you may be wondering what the correlation between this horror show and Rilakkuma have together. Well, good question. They were both animated by the same dude. Yeah, for real. Shigeru Okada is a stop-motion animator who is based in Japan, and he had a hand in working on the Rilakkuma series as an animator. Yet, he is better known for his personal projects on YouTube, where he's conjured up a bunch of really awesome little horror shorts on his channel. He hasn't made that many, but the ones he has worked on have gotten a relative amount of fame. Now, keep in mind, while Okada hasn't worked on too many shorts, stop-motion animation is serious hard work, just like any form of animation is. Yet, there is a certain craft to stop-motion that needs more fidelity than most other mediums, and Okada works on all of his shorts by himself. He's not being paid by anyone to make this, it's all for the love of the craft, and I gotta be honest, most of his work are incredibly ambitious, often focusing on relatively large stories. They're very well done, and to be honest, stop-motion horror isn't really an explored piece of media in Japan. Neither is stop-motion animation in general, in fact. So seeing this made by someone we never heard of and making original and creative ideas with a medium that has yet to be explored in depth is very interesting and incredibly refreshing, which brings me to the unfortunate part of the series where I tell you all about the cool thing that was never released or never saw the light of day. The Depth of Yagen was, and still currently is, Okada's most ambitious goal, a 5-part series that chronicles the journey of a mother trying to save her daughter from a group of traffickers that kidnapped her. Cursed by the mountain she lives on, the mother transforms into a hideous creature and continues her pursuit with her newfound and horrifying transformation. I love it, and from what I've seen, it could have been incredible. Each episode was set to be about 8 to 9 minutes long, which is crazy considering Okada's longest project was just 9 minutes in itself. So making an entire series that could have lasted around 40 minutes or so would have been a daunting task, a task that nearly costed $14,000. The goal was set on Kickstarter, yet sadly not many people saw the promotional video, nor did it garner that much attention, as Okada ended up with only $4,300. And this is Kickstarter, so if he hadn't reached his goal, he wasn't going to get the money anyway, so the show received a total of $0 in fundraising. It's sad because I am interested in Okada's animations. I found him during a stream when someone had recommended him to me in the chat. When I saw his animations, I was fascinated and shocked to learn that he was also an animator on the Rilakkuma and Kaoru series. And this is from a man who just recently found out his passion and love for stop motion animation later in his life. He started animating when he was 33 years old and has since worked on shows, commercials, and even made a book on stop motion animation, as well as teaching young kids how to animate. I love it when people discover new passions later in their lives, and I adore what this man has to offer. I want to nourish new ideas and make sure they blossom. Sadly, the animation was never funded. It was set to be released this year, but no word has been made on the show's progress since the page's initial conception. The only update we got was that Okada couldn't raise his funds, and that he'll venture into other campaigns in the future, but not all hope is lost. As stated by Okada himself in his Kickstarter page, whether or not this gets funded, the animation will be finished. It just would have helped him in producing the show, as well as potentially bringing it into the mainstream, as Okada's one true goal is to make opportunities, or rather more opportunities, for stop motion to thrive in Japan, as like I said, it is relatively obscure. Now well, hopefully we can get more updates on him soon, and hopefully his dream of making stop motion animation a mainstream idea in Japan will come to fruition. Good luck, Shigeru Okada. I'll support whatever venture you have up your sleeves. I'm a big fan. Magic the Gathering is among the greatest card games ever made and the most complex ever, but first and foremost, it's still a collectible card game. So while the game is very fun and the mechanics are always super interesting, some people only pursue the collection aspect of the game. The fundamentals of Magic in the game itself are null to some people because there are a ton of cards in Magic's history that hold an enormous amount of wealth behind them. The most famous example, of course, being Black Lotus, a card that literally only saw prints during the game's limited alpha, beta, and unlimited edition. Now granted, all the cards found in the alpha, beta, and unlimited editions, unless reprinted, have some sort of immense value, but Black Lotus is special. This card has sold for $166,000 in a recent auction earlier this year. Yeah, a lot of money for a piece of cardboard, but why is it worth so much? Well, aside from only seeing a few prints during the game's genesis, it is amongst the Power 9, a set of elusive cards that are said to be the most powerful cards in all of Magic history. Those cards also never seeing reprints, unless of course you count the MTG Online reprints as reprints, but whatever. But so it's because of its power and its exclusivity, and just for the fact that it's probably the most legendary and talked about Magic card ever, that makes Black Lotus so valuable. And if you're a scrub to the game thinking that this card will ever get reprinted, sorry, but Wizards of the Coast has an incredibly strict policy on reprints and will never ever reprint certain cards for as long as we live. So either go hunting for the alpha, beta, or unlimited packs, or just buy one. Yeah, just buy one. Who am I kidding? But me talking about rare cards isn't really what Boosemas is about, right? I mean, Boosemas talks about unreleased stuff, unreleased content that some, if not everybody, has never seen or played with before. And technically, while most people have never seen or even touched Black Lotus in real life, it's still obtainable if you're either really lucky or really rich, or if you're a filthy fucking thief. Well, the same could be said about most of what I talk about, especially the international games that were never released here in the States. So I'm just going to be loose here and say that I can talk about rare and unreleased Magic cards because, let's face it, you've got more of a chance to buy a Satellaview than you ever will a Black Lotus card. Now, before I get into these cards, I would like to briefly mention that the cards won't really be talked about too much, like the mechanics of what they hold. I'm not really a very good Magic player, so I don't want to give my own input on these cards as if I know what they're good for or what they should be used for or whatever. I'm just a casual idiot that sometimes likes to play Pauper. Leave me alone. Side note, this video was originally going to talk about the unreleased, unhinged, and unglued cards, but I felt that was too obscure, so I won't cover those. But if this video does do well, I'll probably maybe do a video on them later in Boosemas. Let's say about 20,000 views and I'll cover it. Why not? Side note, I'm a bit behind with Boosemas, so I hope you understand why this video wasn't very heavily edited. Gomene, I apologize, disculpame, I'll try my best to catch up. The first card up is one by the name of the Mana Crypt. a card that was randomly distributed to people by Wizards of the Coast via a coupon found on the back of the book of Final Sacrifice that was originally going to be printed in 1995. One of several cards that were sent to lucky people that mailed their coupons. Final Sacrifice was one of 5 books in a series of novels published by Harper Prism that had this promotion. Each book had the coupon on the back that gave you a different card depending on which book coupon you sent. Final Sacrifice wasn't the only book you could get Mana Crypt, as the Cursed Land also had an offering that got rid of remaining unclaimed cards and could technically give you the Mana Crypt as a reward, but unlike Final Sacrifice where Mana Crypt was 100% guaranteed, Cursed Land would give out a random card from one of the previous books in the series, so it wasn't very likely that you were going to get it. All of these cards are reprints of older cards or saw reprints in future games, yet Mana Crypt never received this treatment until 2016 when it was officially printed in Vintage Masters. The average price for this thing is about $260 and the reprint is on average $180. Next up, the 1996 World Champion card, a comically overpowered Magic card that was given to the 1996 World Champion, Tom Chappenhang. Jesus, why am I can't pronounce anything. Only one of these cards was ever printed, making it one of MTG's rarest card ever. Every other copy of the card, plus the printing plate, was ceremoniously destroyed. It was apparently sold off for a whopping $200,000, and the current owner of the card is unknown. Similarly, there's the Shichifukujin Dragon, which was printed only once and was given to the DCI Tournament Center located in Japan. Yet, unlike World Champion's card, this one was given to just the store itself to commemorate the opening. Sadly, the store closed down in 2003, and the card was moved over to Hobby Japan head office, where it can currently be found. It has never been sold before, and I don't think one single person owns it, but I could only imagine if it were sold, it would probably be about $200,000 to $250,000. Next up, did you know that the Power 9 might have been the Power 10 at some point? Thanks to the unreleased Crystalline Mox, or better known as the Crystal Mox. It was play tested for Mirage, but ended up being scrapped for unknown reasons. Probably because it was a Mox, and probably going to break the game, I guess. The artwork was salvaged and later recycled for Enlightened Tutor though, so there's something. This one's really funny. It's Starburst, and it's a red card that never released that essentially made the opponent lose his or her next turn, yet it had poor wording that confused players. Opponents loses next turn. So do they lose on the next turn, or do they lose their next turn? You can only imagine why this never made to print, but also it was a red sorcery card, which, while not impossible, is a rarity for the red motif, so it probably wouldn't have fit the theme. Though if this one does seem familiar to you, that's because Blue had a very similar yet infinitely better worded card called Time Walk, which was one of the Power 9 that allowed you to take an extra turn. Speaking of time walking, did you know that there were some plans to add a 6th additional color? It's true, if you play Magic, you should be familiar with all 5 of the Magic colors, red, blue, green, white, and black, but a 6th one, which was purple, was planned at some point. It first showed up as a prank by the gaming magazine Inquest back in 1997, yet eventually turned into a real concept for Planar Chaos. It was meant to invoke the alternate reality themes that Planar Chaos was going for, and it was meant to have cities or caves as its land, but eventually it was scrapped. Mark Rosewater has talked about the addition of a 6th color and that it may be in the center of the color pie to represent a unity of color. He never specifically said that it was the color purple, but he does have some ideas on the 6th color that would be a combination of all colors that borrowed attributes from each other color on the pie. But Wizards scrapping an entire color probably isn't as crazy as them scrapping a whole expansion. It was called Spectral Chaos, and apparently it was the first multicolor expansion that was going to introduce the concept. In this set, multicolored cards of opposite colors were called Chaos cards and were a bit more nuanced mechanically by including just nutty rules like Life Geyser, where every player gained 100 life. There was an artifact card that ended the game once you used 20 mana to cast it and 10 mana to activate it. But craziest of them all was a card that was named after the expansion itself, Spectral Chaos, which costed 2 of each of the 5 colors to cast and made both players switch sides and attempt to win with their deck and hand. The opposite opponent's hand anyways. It's really a chaotic set, and and really ahead of its time. Eventually, some of these mechanics would be reused for later sets, and there is a ton of info on the set found by one particular YouTuber who I'll leave in the description below if you're interested on finding out more info about this. There's no art or cards made for this set, so I had to use his video as B-roll. Now let's get into some cards that were made for promotional reasons, but not really. So, when The Sorcerer's Apprentice was being made, Wizards was approached by the filmmakers to make them exclusive cards for the film, but not to be distributed or sold or even won through contests, but just for props in the movie. There's this character named Drake Stone who's this lousy wizard that knows the bare minimum magic in order to become an illusionist. He's so famous and rich in this world that Magic the Gathering, or Wizards of the Coast in this matter, makes cards based off of him in the movie. They're not too bad looking, but would it be wrong if I said that they looked low effort? It just seems like they got headshots of the character and traced over him while adding some effects and backgrounds. It's definitely not the best looking cards, but it's also not the worst. Last but not least, the most elusive card of them all, Proposal. It's a card that was developed for only one person, and that person, of course, being Richard Garfield, also known as the creator of Magic the Gathering. This card was made to propose to his then girlfriend Lily Wu. The story goes that he wanted to make the proposal special, so Richard asked Dave Howell, a designer for the game, to make a card for him to cast while the two of them played together. He also contacted Lily's favorite artist, Quentin Hoover, to design an original piece just for the card. The artwork reportedly had Richard kneeling down before Lily Wu while the two of them wore Renaissance-styled clothing. 2 out of 9 of the cards produced were apparently off-center and a bit shinier than other Magic cards, but otherwise they came out alright. Funny enough, while the two of them were playing a game together, it took Richard 4 games until he could finally draw the proposal card. During the 4th game, Lily Wu actually thought Richard would concede at some point as she was a playtester and knew he had nothing that could make him win the match that they were playing. Then the card was cast, finally, and she said yes. The two of them merged their decks together and graveyards together as stated in the card, and both won the game and married soon after. And reportedly, that deck of cards that were merged together is still a deck of cards to this day. The remaining few cards that were produced were given to family and friends, yet sadly Quentin Hoover, a recipient and artist of the card, had his copy stolen and its whereabouts remain unknown. The reason I saved this for last, other than its story and the meaning behind it, is that it's literally one of Magic's most elusive cards. Nobody other than the recipients and that one bitch thief have ever seen the card. And to be honest, nobody ever will, as the couple have told everyone who received the cards to not publish the artwork, as it is a personal treasure to them. They don't want it to be seen by other people other than themselves and their friends and family. So far, this has been respected, yet a scan of one version of the card was found, but the artwork was not included, so it still remains a mystery to this day, and that's kinda cool. Anyways, those were just a few Magic cards that never saw the light of day, and I know there are a ton that I didn't cover. But if you do want me to cover this topic again, I'd totally be down for it, but I'll let the view count decide for me. So make sure to share and like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and please enjoy the rest of Boosemas. We still got 18 more videos left to go, so enjoy the ride. See you guys soon. Love y'all. Bye. Joker portrayals in media have always proved to be a heated discussion. I swear, whenever a new Joker actor is revealed, people freak out. Wait, Jack Nicholson as the Joker? That's kinda weird. Isn't he like that guy from The Witches of Eastwick? That'll never work. Wait, Mark Hamill as the Joker? Isn't he from Star Wars? That'll never work. Wait, that gay guy from the Brokeback Mountain movies? He's the Joker? What is he gonna buttfuck Batman? It'll never work. Oh, Jared Leto? I could see that. But there is one you probably never heard of, and that's Tim Curry. the man behind the powder of makeup that is Pennywise, and the voice of Elijah Thornberry's dad, Nigel Thornberry. Yeah, it was a real brief moment in time, but Tim Curry was considered as the Joker for the Batman animated series. In fact, he was more than considered. It was a sure thing that he'd be the Joker. He was hired and everything. He even recorded up to 5 episodes as the Joker himself. Unfortunately, Tim Curry came down with bronchitis and the show's producers just fired him. They couldn't wait for him to get better and needed a step-in actor immediately, so they hired Mark Hamill as a replacement and just stuck with it ever since. It would have been interesting to have Tim Curry as the Joker, seeing as how he's already used to playing clowns on TV, but also because Mark Hamill is often seen as the prime example to what the Joker should sound like or how he should behave. It's so influential that other actors often copy his voice when auditioning and playing as the Joker, so removing that influential voice away and giving it instead to Tim Curry? I mean, I'm sure it would have changed the way we look at the Joker as a character. Though, would it have been a bad choice? Nah, not really. Tim Curry used to have a very deep and sultry voice that could definitely give off the right kind of vibes the animators were looking for, but it's hard to imagine what he would have done with the role had he been in it. Sadly, after Tim Curry's stroke in 2012, he hasn't really displayed the sort of vivacity he once had, so don't expect him to be taking up any sort of Joker roles anytime soon, though he is still a voice actor and continues to pursue roles as one. The truth is, the only way we'd find out about what kind of Joker he would have been or what he would have sounded like is if the studio that recorded his lines released them one day. Yet that's very unlikely. There's no demand for it, nor would I think it's really worth the effort. It's just for those who are ready to fulfill their curiosities and the ones that love lost media such as myself. It's also not guaranteed that the studio even has those clips left anymore, and we don't even know if they even used it for the episodes. Maybe he wasn't even done finishing recording those 4 episodes that he was a part of. The only snippet, the only hint that we can get out of what he would have sounded like was through one episode that actually uses his voice clip for a laughing robot clown that stops this boy in place.
Naughty, naughty, you're making me miss the show.
It sucks, but hey, in the words of Tim Curry himself, that's life. Here's a confession. I wasn't a big fan of Adult Swim as a kid. Yeah, in fact, I hated it. I didn't really understand the adult humor, and I especially hated the animation's poor quality. And that makes sense, because Adult Swim started off with like the budget of a shoelace when they first began. So many of the shows that they had and they produced were ugly, because they just couldn't afford anything else. It was also past my Betty Bye time, so yet there were a few shows that always kept me around, such as Yu Yu Hakusho, Cowboy Bebop, Outlaw Stars, you know, the stuff that doesn't actually look like fucking garbage home movies. Nah, but I actually rewatched it. It's actually pretty funny, but really ugly though. But aside from the weeb shit, I actually really enjoyed watching one show called Baby Blues, which was syndicated after its original channel dropped it, which was the WB Network. It's based off the comic of the same name, which is probably evident by the art style. I don't know what it is about comics, but they literally all have the same art style. I don't know. Yet interestingly, the show itself is actually a prequel to the comic. The main characters, Daryl and Wanda, have 3 kids in the comic, but here they only have 1 baby. And I'm assuming they plan maybe long term for the show, as I'm sure they would have had more kids as the series went on, but sadly, the series ended just midway through the first season. Are you fucking kidding me right now? Could you stop listening?
I'm here.
Stop listening to me. It was probably canceled due to some low ratings, which makes sense. You gotta keep in mind the climate of cartoons at the time. Adult cartoons were a hit new thing that was still being explored, as it was popularized by shows like The Simpsons and South Park, which were massive hits around the time Baby Blues came out. Everyone wanted to be the next Simpsons. Everyone wanted to be the next South Park. And some tried to be their own thing and succeeded, but others ended up failing miserably. Baby Blues was no different. See, The Simpsons and South Park were incredibly popular and widely due to the fact that they were edgy. They had that in-your-face attitude that shaped the 90s and the way we see cartoons as a media, and Baby Blues just wasn't that. It was a fairly mellow cartoon with dry wit and a sardonic view on being parents. The title is Baby Blues, for God's sake. That's another term for postpartum depression. But that's not to say it wasn't edgy at times, if not a little clumsy with its edginess, but compared to everyone else, it really wasn't as spastic as the competition or foul-mouthed enough to be adored by bratty kids who think that's really what adults like. And that's the show's detriment, as stated earlier. The show ended just halfway through its first season, with only 8 episodes being released on the WB and the last 5 episodes being treated as their own season on Adult Swim. Yet the real tragedy of it was that there was a legit second season with 13 episodes produced. Not one episode has been released, even though they are completely 100% done. And by the way, just for clarity's sake, there are season 2 episodes, quote unquote, on YouTube, but that's a bit of a misunderstanding. It only refers to the last 5 episodes of the first season, which I stated earlier was re-aired on Adult Swim. So it's really just season 1's last episodes, and titling it season 2 is just an erroneous mistake. It's a real bummer when you consider that Adult Swim is known to be the reason why most shows get the revivals. Family Guy, Samurai Jack, Boondocks, hell, even Toonami has its own revival thanks in part to Adult Swim, but even with their second season already made, Baby Blues just wasn't a good enough show for some people to revive it, as the ratings spoke louder than the production itself. Nobody, other than the people who worked on the show, has ever seen the second season, and we probably never will. And it's a real shame, because shows like this, I feel, may or may not even work to this day. There's just a certain air to it that gave it its special unique properties, just like how Mission Hill wasn't really that edgy in-your-face comedy either, but it also had that mellow, dry, sarcastic humor that I personally really enjoy. Yet that sort of comedy doesn't usually work in American media, and I'm not really sure why. It seems like we always favor the ones that are more hyperly violent and filled with shitty people, like Family Guy. But who knows, maybe that comedy style will be accepted today. But judging by the fact that we're getting more and more colorful cartoons nowadays, and not really ones that are focused on being dry and mellow, I don't know, it's just really hard to say. But hopefully, maybe sometime in the future, there will be a show that'll be much better than Baby Blues and have that sort of unique dry humor that you really don't see too much of nowadays. Primal Rage is a game series that has been forgotten in the annals of time. It's one of the most edgy games out there that pretty much fit the bill for any other edgy game that was around the mid-90s because of Mortal Kombat's success. Oh yeah, games like Primal Rage were pretty common back then, especially because of Mortal Kombat's peak. You know, the type of games that are like needlessly bloody and have shitty controls, yet somewhat of an interesting style. Yeah, Primal Rage was one of them, despite the cookie-cutter concept. It still had a unique approach, what with its giant monster motif and the fact that the characters were all stop-motion animations, all of them receiving around 400 different frames per character. A lot of hard work was put into these rigs, and it shows as it stood out. Well, I mean, sorta. I mean, everyone else was doing the whole Mortal Kombat thing of like superimposing real-life people into the game, so it didn't look that fucking different, but the animations are still very solid and have a very Harryhausen feel to it. The gameplay was also pretty unique, what with its game involving the use of background audiences as a resource that can be used to throw against the enemy or to eat in order to gain back some health. Also, the controls were something. Unique is definitely a word I'd use, but good? Nah, it was trash. Like steaming pile of hot dog trash. Also, the story was stupid too, set on Earth after a huge meteor came and wiped out almost all of humanity in the Earth's ecosystems. The Earth was then renamed Earth. Fucking stupid. And all of mankind reverted back into the Stone Age, where giant beasts have emerged from the depths from their slumber and are now using humans as fodder for food and worship. Yet not all beasts wish to work together. Some beasts wish to restore the earth, while others just want to destroy it. Cool. So Dr. Stone, but with kaiju. Got it. But despite the flaws of the game, it was still loved and praised. It was a huge commercial success, and development on the sequel was on its way. Yet, reportedly, it didn't get too far, as the sequel itself was cancelled pretty early into the development. Now, the sequel itself was said to have about 6 buttons, just like normal fighters like Street Fighter and such, and they had new characters called avatars. See, the giant meteor that apparently destroyed and murked the Earth was apparently a giant egg that hatched a giant demon alien named Necro-San. He imprisoned all of the 7 gods from the previous games, and they were too weak to stop him. The 7 gods then chose human avatars that helped free them from the prison and killed all of Necro-San's minions, and are now attempting to stop Necro-San himself. Cool. So, like JoJo, whatever. The development of the game already started, and even confirmed to be released around September of 1996, yet it was soon halted not that far into production as mentioned earlier. Confusingly enough, the game's developers, Atari, decided not to continue development due to them believing it wouldn't be as successful. And that's strange considering that the first game did remarkably well, so what gives? Well, this is just speculation, but I'm assuming their predictions were probably right. Primal Rage came out in 1994, and like I said, this was around the peak of Mortal Kombat's success. The 3rd game of the franchise hadn't been released yet, but it was around the corner, so it was about the best time to cash in on that sweet gory money while it was still fresh. Conversely, Primal Rage 2 was being developed in 1996, and during this time, some big hitters were being released, such as Soul Blade, Tekken 2, Virtua Fighter 3, Dead or Alive, all these games being wildly popular. But do you notice something similar about these games? Yeah, they're all in 3D. And the latest Primal Rage game was going to stick to the then ancient format of 2D planes. Those games were being left in the dust. The new trend of 3D fighting games were taking over. Even Street Fighter wanted a piece of that action, with Street Fighter EX coming out in, you guessed it, 1996. So was it really any wonder why Atari was so afraid of releasing Primal Rage 2? It was a scary venture, and it was still going to do the whole stop motion animated sprite, so it was definitely going to be a lot of hard work done for possibly nothing. So the idea was scrapped, shelved, and never seen or heard from again. There were a few test arcades being shown around the 90s in a few locations, and a rumored complete version of the arcade shown in the California Extreme 2001 show, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. This mythical status of the game circulated around the internet, possibly existing, maybe being out there somewhere as a ROM or as a fully fledged cabinet. Maybe the dev team actually got much farther than we thought, and people just underestimated how much work was put into it. Yet for nearly 20 years, these were just baseless accusations. They were just rumors, myths, and eventually, the search for the missing Primal Rage sequel turned into more of like the search for the Holy Grail. But nobody had any definitive answers. That is, of course, until 2012, when a YouTuber dropped a fucking bomb and showcased never before seen info on Primal Rage 2, including gameplay footage and characters. Then, an arcade found in Brookfield, Illinois, called the Galloping Ghost Arcade, showed their very own video in 2014 of an actual working cabinet of the game. What? So the game exists? Was it complete? Well, no, actually. The versions that were found for Primal Rage 2 were very early beta / prototype versions of the game. According to Doc Mack from the Galloping Ghost, the version they had purchased was version 0.36. Soon after this wealth of info was found, people hit the ground running and tried to emulate the game's board on MAME emulators, yet due to technical reasons, it just wasn't able to run on current MAME emulators. So the only way you'd be able to play this then mythical game was to head on over to Galloping Horse Arcades. That is, of course, until 2017, when someone straight up said, "Fuck that shit, I want to play this game at home," and they made their own dedicated MAME emulator called MAME for Rage 2. It is literally an emulator made solely to run the Primal Rage 2 prototype. Jesus Christ, this fan base is way more dedicated than I thought. So now, yes, it is possible to play Primal Rage 2, or rather what was finished of it. It's pretty buggy here and there, and some assets remain incomplete, but hey, if you're a fan of the first game, then maybe you'll love the sequel, and it's completely available to play for free. It's actually really nice looking, and I'd say it's better than the original. I mean, hopefully it was better. I heard some people were upset that you had to play as human characters, that is the avatars, and that the gods only came out during your supers, but that's fine with me, honestly. Though I will say that the avatars kind of look weird. It's kind of like a weird ghetto celebrity deathmatch knockoff, but that's enough out of me. I'll let you all decide for yourselves whether the game is good or not. Again, it's only part of a game that is not fully released, so don't expect a masterpiece. So go out there with low expectations and judge for yourself. Beat Takeshi is among the most influential figures in Japan. In my eyes, he's the reason why Japanese TV is considered weird, and one of the reasons why Japanese game shows is a popular search term on YouTube. He's the man behind a bunch of funny, outlandish skits involving himself and his comedy buddies, being more popular here in the West as the man behind Takeshi's Castle, or MXC, here in the States. Beat Takeshi is known around Japan as an innovator of comedy, but he's also known as an amazing filmmaker, a great artist, an entertainer, an actor, a singer, an author, and many other things. It's these qualities of Beat Takeshi that makes me love him, and his creative mind is just one to be cherished. The man is a jack of all trades, and damn, he's good at most of them. Well, except for maybe game development. Yep, that's right. The dude that made Japan weird also made one of Japan's weirdest, most absurd game called Takeshi no Chosenjo, or The Ultimate Challenge from Beat Takeshi, released on the Famicom in December 1986. Now, it's no secret that Beat Takeshi absolutely hates games, and apparently also anime, especially Miyazaki, but he also hates emails and computers as well. Yeah, okay, boomer. So why is it that Beat Takeshi wanted to make a game if he hates the media so much? Simple. It was a joke. You see, Beat Takeshi's game was a unique one, where you first load up the game, you get a pretty typical side-scroller game, one where you play as a drunk salaryman who wanders the streets of Tokyo and on the islands of the South Pacific as well. There's townsfolk you can talk to, or beat up if you like. You can even beat up the Yakuza members. But the game is brutally difficult, often making the player get a game over screen due to something bizarre yet totally intentional. Like how you can punch an old man on the password screen, resulting in a game over before the game even starts. You can also travel to the mysterious land called the Red Country, which apparently is just a Soviet Russia / Nazi Germany thing. You can also just sing karaoke with the Famicom's built-in mic. You can divorce your wife and pay off the settlement, or just beat the shit out of her and the kids. The game is twisted, it's weird, it's funny, but above all else, just a huge slap in the face for all gamers. You play as a salaryman seeking adventure, for God's sake. This isn't some superhero or warrior or mage or thief. Nah, you're just some drunk motherfucker. You pay alimony. The game allows you to deposit and withdraw stuff from the bank. You can go like full on a legit serious funeral if you die. The Yakuza can beat the shit out of you for just being too loud on the mic while playing pachinko. It's like the most mundane shit ever, that it's actually pretty funny. Though as a kid you might find the game stupid boring, and the parody aspects of the game might have gone right over little kids' heads at the time. Though this game is innovative, not gonna lie. The whole singing into the mic thing and the beating up of civilians, you know, like, people took ages till they actually made games where you could do that, like beat up civilians and talk to whoever you want. Plus, in a way, you could say Takeshi's Challenge was the first walking simulator, as some games nowadays are just as mundane, if not even more mundane than Takeshi's Challenge. But there is a definitive hate for the games, as could be seen from this game. Actually, I found out that Beat Takeshi wanted to add way more into the game that's far more sadistic, like beating up everyone or like murdering people, going to jail and stuff like that. But because of the limits, and probably because nobody wanted him to do that crazy bullshit, it probably was for the best that they never added it.
Which makes sense because as much as he's known as a comedian loved and adored by all in Japan, he's also known to make some bleak, nihilistic movies, which sort of fits with his style of how he made the game. Well, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, the game never released outside of Japan. It's been re-released on the Virtual Shop and apparently on phones, but that's it. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, Beat Takeshi isn't really a household name here in America, and as funny and innovative as the game sounds, it's still considered by many to be one of the worst games ever made. Now, I'm not sure what Beat Takeshi's current stance on video games is now. I mean, when he stated that he hated video games, that was like around the 90s. But seeing as how he's in the latest Yakuza game, I'm assuming maybe he's lightened up on his hatred and is now seeing the potential games have as an art form. At least, I hope so, because I really want to see what Takeshi would do with a video game nowadays if he became a developer again. I love it. I love it when outlandish minds do outlandish things in this medium. And think of it all, like the crazy things he must have for a video game is really exciting. Maybe someday he'll make one more Beat Takeshi Ultimate Challenge game. Who knows? I mean, really. Maybe it'll be just as wacky, mundane, esoteric, and maybe it'll be just as funny as the original. But as for now, the guy still hates games, and I don't think we'll see anything out of him anytime soon. So, enjoy the translated versions of this game if you can, but don't expect anything great. It's kind of dry. Let's just say that. I think a lot of people have already made a video on this, so I'll make this one quick. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure was and still is one of the biggest manga franchises in Japan and around the world, and during its peak years, which was around the 90s, when Stardust Crusader defined the way we looked at powers we now know as stands, gaming companies jumped on the opportunity to make games out of this giant, successful franchise. The most famous game during this time period was the JoJo fighting game, simply titled JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It was traditional fighting game action that we all know and love, and it had a ton of Part 3 characters and their stands. Later, a revised version called Heritage of the Future was released and had even more characters. Yet, this won't be what we're talking about. We're taking a look at the lesser known yet just as beloved SNES game, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Wait, really? Another JoJo? They just like name it that? Not even like a subtitle. Well, whatever. The odd or perhaps interesting part of this game is how completely different it is from future games. Like, sure, it's 1993 and the most famous format during the time was like point and click stuff. Right, whatever. That's for like grand adventures that you need to pump out as a video game. I get it. And sure, it makes sense that JoJo would be a fighter or brawler. But the ambition to make JoJo a point and click adventure RPG is interesting. And quite frankly, I think this sort of genre should be explored more with anime nowadays. People always want to make shonen or shonen-esque manga into more fighting game genres. Like, they're always just brawlers. I get where they're coming from, but quite frankly, I'm sick of it all. The cookie cutter fighting game stuff is just kind of boring now. They all look the same. Making the mostly action-oriented manga of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure into a point-and-click RPG is a bold choice, yet does it really work out for this game, for this brand? Well, let's take a look at the game a little bit further. The story hasn't changed much. If you've read or watched Part 3, you'll know what the story is and where everything takes place. You start from Japan, fighting Kakyoin, and end up in Cairo to fight Dio at the very end. The game required you to just move left or right until you can check out more clues or talk to the right NPC, and the combat is fairly complex for a 1993 game. It's got something called the biorhythm system, which sounds like an evil device like found in Resident Evil or something, but it just affects how characters fight depending on their state of mind. The more stress they had, the less damage they do. When battle starts, the player chooses a tarot card offered by Dio, and the character will either receive a buff or debuff depending on what he chose. There's two ways to beat an enemy. Either beat them till their HP is down, or insult them and call them cringy and fat and to quit the fanbase. Or just, you know, demoralize them and drain them of MP. MP standing for mental points, and once it's completely drained, the person gives up and is too demoralized to fight. There's also a heavy emphasis on tarot cards in this game. As stated earlier, there's the debuffs and buffs you can get from DO from each time you start the battle, but there's the tarot option you can do, which allows Avdol to tell you which of your items is lucky, and the prediction move, which pretty much works the same. Finally, there's this one cool move called checking, which allows you to check out the character, and it allows you to perform an action that was inspired by the manga itself, or you could do a guts attack, which is a far more powerful version of attacking. Other than that, there really isn't much to say others haven't already said. The game is an interesting relic of time, and no other RPGs have been made since of the game. Well, unless you count the mobile games, but no, not really. Nobody really counts mobile games. Honestly, I'd love to see the idea be explored again. I'd love to see what a modern JRPG JoJo would look like and play like. I think, honestly, that genre fits JoJo's aesthetic anyways, seeing as how it's not always about the action in the manga, but rather about the story and the mystery behind it. So, I just want to see more of that. As of now, the game has never been fully released outside of Japan, and chances are it never will. It's 26 years old now, and new JoJo games have since been like trading crowns around of who's the king of all JoJo video games. Until then, just enjoy the English patch version and find out if this game is all it's cracked up to be. Ah, Chucky, horror movie's first manlet. Well, I already talked about him to an extent during my Traumathon video, so just go check that out if you don't really know who Chucky is. But to summarize, Chucky is this killer doll that loves to kill, and he's got a ton of movies, not all of them particularly great, but sure as hell scared a lot of kids back in the day, including me. So while conquering theaters for a short amount of time and conquering many sequels, Chucky was pretty much an icon for what, maybe close to a decade. So it's kind of surprising to think that, well, there's no Chucky video games, is there? I mean, there's a video game for just about any other horror movie out there that has a slasher or something or whatever, but no real Chucky video game. If only there was one. What would that be? Oh yeah, this game called Chucky Wanna Play. The game was first announced by Tick Games for PCs and consoles, and then it was later on announced as a Kickstarter campaign of October 2012. So being a Kickstarter, you could either think that this game was going to be a huge success, or one that had a large loss. Well, if you're watching this video, you know sure as hell that it did not win its Kickstarter goals. But before we get into that, I'd like to talk about today's sponsors, Raid Shadow. I'm just fucking kidding. Give me a fucking sponsor, for Christ's sake. No, but seriously, let's talk about the game itself, because there's not really much gameplay footage. Instead, there's this really cringy trailer made by the devs themselves that it's just really hard to watch. But boy, if you think that's hard to watch, wait till you see the gameplay. Now, I'm not trying to knock too hard on the gameplay itself or the footage that is shown. I mean, it is a prototype of a game, and this is 2011, so I don't expect the highest quality of gameplay. And also, Kickstarter was fairly young at the time, so nobody really had a successful story to go off of, so this is alright. But to be honest, judging solely on the trailer itself, I just don't have much confidence in these guys making a good game. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh on these indie dudes. Maybe they actually have a good product, and maybe Kickstarter will help them out. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, oh no. So they were asking for a grand slam total of nearly $1 million with $925,000. Getting only $585 out of 19 backers. Now, I'm not sure why it was so abysmal, but honestly, I think they were asking a little much. I mean, the game itself, while there's no real info on what it could have been, doesn't really seem that complicated. It is a game where you just sneak around and kill innocent civilians, pedestrians in very creative ways. I guess sort of like a stealthy Mad World kind of game, you know? Just be as creative as possible and just let the gore flow. But that vagueness might have been to the game's detriment, honestly. But the thing is that this game, it's not like it had no budget whatsoever, even though Tick Games isn't really known for making huge games before. I mean, these are the guys behind such great games such as Domino Master,
Flower Stand Tycoon, Mahjong Tales, Ancient Wisdom, Wobbly Bobbly, Square Off, Gold Fever, Zane Moji, and Monopoly. So not really the kind of guys you'd expect a game of this caliber to come from. But as stated earlier, it wasn't like some sort of dead-end project. They had funding. They had the license to actually make the game. They had $500,000 to work on with this game, and I'm sure they needed the money for other things, but $500,000 is a lot already. I mean, so many games get made just off of that budget alone. And I think maybe I'm just overreaching here, but wanting over $1 million for this game when your company is only known for these phone games, I mean, I think you should probably know your place and just go with what you can work with, to be honest. Well, it doesn't matter. You guys already know that this game's canceled. I mean, you're watching Boosemas, for Christ's sake. This game didn't make it very far. The only gameplay footage we do have is from the trailer itself of the initial Kickstarter video and some screenshots here and there. It's not the prettiest in the world, but considering that Friday the 13th had released just recently, and even though people don't really like it, the possibility is still there. Maybe they can just kickstart this all over again. Maybe they can actually make something with this game. I mean, hell, if Friday the 13th was successful enough, then maybe there's a surprise demand for Chucky. I mean, the reboot already came out, maybe they could jump on that, but it's unlikely. Again, these guys haven't really made anything after that abysmal project was not funded. It's highly unlikely that these guys are going to make anything for that license. But who knows, maybe you'll see Chucky for Dead by Daylight someday. I mean, Christ's sakes, everybody's already in there, so who's to say Chucky won't be there? But unfortunately, that's probably the most we'll ever get to see out of Chuck. If you've ever watched me stream trailer reactions such as like E3 or the most recent Game Awards show, you'll know that I really hate cinematic game trailers. They're kind of pointless in my opinion. I don't really mind when a game has cinematic trailers so long as there's some gameplay with the cinematic, or if there's a gameplay trailer followed soon after or somewhere that I can watch. I mean, I get it. You gotta establish a world and story in a fancy, often beautiful way. It's also an eye catcher to get people talking. I get that. But I think it's silly, if not annoying, to know that one game that got people talking doesn't even have gameplay. Suddenly, when the game actually has gameplay trailers ready, it's garbage. It's not what we really expected. Nothing has instilled this hatred towards cinematic trailers more than the long-forgotten 8 Days. This is where it all started, where tiny baby Goose first got his glimpse at the real world of game development and the lies they often inhibit. 8 Days, in my eyes, is the pinnacle of misleading marketing. It first showed up on stage at E3 2006, hot after the PS3 was announced just a year earlier. It was made as a sort of tech demo showing off the PS3 at first, but then it was announced as if it were a real game. It had all these little nuances that made it look like it was a real game, even though most of it didn't look real at all by today's standards. And I mean, game companies do this all the time. They always show off a game that is graphically impressive, but usually lacking in terms of, well, actual gameplay. These are often the launch title games, and while pretty, yes, they often aren't really that exciting or really that memorable. Famous examples include Heavenly Sword, The Order 1886, Rise, Son of Rome, Condemned, Criminal Origins. I mean, these games, they're not really the worst. Some of them not even are bad, especially not Condemned, but the focus on these games were always on graphical fidelity and not really exceptional gameplay. But nothing has been more egregious than 8 Days. It started with this trailer, and honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I really thought that this is how the game looked. It looks all pretty, it has these amazing textures, amazing lighting, real-time graphics. I mean, hell, I was an idiot, I still am, but when I was told that this was running in real time, I legit thought that that meant what I was seeing was a real game, never considering that it was probably just a tech demo. But really, how could you blame me? The trailer did its best to look like a real game with all things considered an ugly UI, sure, but they told us that this was a real game that was coming out soon. Looking back now, it's horribly obvious just how fake this game is. Nothing about this trailer looks anything like a real game. Even by today's standards, nothing runs this smooth. I mean, granted, sure, some games do it well, but we're still not in the levels that 8 Days made it seem like with this so obvious tech demo. It was so unbelievably smooth. The animations were so well done. The demo made it seem like transitioning between cutscene and gameplay was just seamless, even though that is totally not the case for consoles like the PS3 and the 360. But things like the atrocious looking minimalist UI tried its best to sell its authenticity, when really it was just probably plastered there in like After Effects, although sometimes you can see it seep into other scenes while transitioning over, so it was fake. So, you know, it's not very convincing. Although I will say this one thing, it's a fun little fact. I remember when I first saw this trailer, I was like, dude, where's the health bar? How do you know that you're gonna die? Because keep in mind, auto regen health, even though it's common nowadays with third-person, first-person shooters, it was not a thing at all back then. So having no health bar was like, whoa, mind-blowing. So that's what made the game trailer make it like, it made it seem way more fantastical, like, oh my god, so innovative. And then we got the cherry on top, which is like flying debris everywhere that's running smoothly. Oh my goodness, wow. It's actually kind of crazy to consider how many people were fooled by these trailers, actually, because the first trailer was blatantly fake. It was just a proof of concept video, definitely a fake game, you know. Yet the new generation of games was here and the possibilities seemed endless. We were just about eating it up. Of course, a lot of people were quizzical about the game when they talked about it, but for the people who were none the wiser, like me, it was a fantastic demo that showed the seemingly limitless power of the PS3. Boy howdy, did it wow me, but then that's when we get the real legit gameplay, and wow, that's fucking hideous. So of course, when the real gameplay was released, we saw 8 Days' true colors. It was ugly. The graphics were significantly lowered, because of course it was. The minimalist UI remained largely the same, yet uglier at the same time, somehow. And the gameplay was, well, fucking boring. It was very typical. It was just a third-person action game that was definitely made in the mid-2000s. It really didn't stand out from the rest. Now, there's a surprising amount of gameplay footage from the real 8 Days game, and one thing I love is that they're still trying to play this off as if it were a tech demo. So many of the trailers just had the main characters just shooting off into nothing, just to show off how good the particle effects were, and to show off how good the debris were. And let me tell you, it did not perform well. Jesus Christ, look at that frame rate drop. Why would you show this? Well, that's the funny thing about the generation of games. So many people were occupied with how good a game looked that rarely people cared about what the frame rate was. Remember Gears of War? No, you don't. That game looked good for the time, but oh my god, did it run like shit. A lot of games ran like shit, but most of us probably don't remember, to be honest, because yeah, it looked good. So, whatever. But alright, enough shitting on the game. What actually was 8 Days about? And what sort of game should we have expected? Well, would you be shocked if I told you it was a highly ambitious and very unrealistic game? Kind of like Boosemas, and expecting that people would actually watch it? So apparently the story was about as dry and boring as my humor. It featured two characters, one that was good and the other one that was bad. The bad guy apparently was hunting down the mob syndicate and, I don't know, for some revenge that was non-descriptive. And the good guy was a detective that was going after the very same mob syndicate after getting his son snatched. The two later meet up and eventually work together. Wow, so compelling. The game was also supposed to have the largest game map ever featured at the time, with the game spanning about 8 different states and having 8 different days in the timeline. I don't know. It also had an in-game clock that synced up with the real world, so whenever you played at night, it would also be nighttime in the game. Wow, that sounds like a lot of bullshit. And it was! The game was shortly announced to be cancelled about like 2 years later in 2008. Sony came to the conclusion that because they had so many first-person games coming out, they needed to focus on those games which were much closer to release, more than a whole new project. Also, a large part of the reason why it was cancelled was because it didn't have any online capabilities. See, Sony and Microsoft, they wanted all hands on deck with like online stuff, because at the time it was a new thing and it was evolving and the market was definitely there, so they needed everyone to focus on that. Man, let me tell you, the amount of projects that this mindset has ruined is near astronomical. Yet about a year later, it was stated that by an ex-developer that the game wasn't actually cancelled, it was just put on hold.
even though it was stated by the very same ex-developer that the game wasn't even in full production. It was still stuck in pre-production. Yeah, so apparently the game is still considered on hold. Alright, my left nutsack is on hold. The game's done with. No need to bring it up. So please, game developers, if you need more time for your game project to have gameplay footage, I understand. I get it. I understand why you need that CG trailer. But please, at least give us screenshots or something. I mean, hell, I'll take this over this any fucking day. You all probably know about this one, but I think it's funny to look back at the one time that Powerpuff Girls was turned into an anime. Yeah. Why? Well, apparently the Powerpuff Girls is super popular in Japan, like wildly so. Now, I haven't found concrete explanations on why the show is so popular over there, but if I had to assume, it'd probably be because Powerpuff Girls is the least American cartoon airing at the time. By this, I mean it's a show that doesn't really have any roots based on American media, whereas some other shows like Johnny Bravo is super alien to the Japanese, you know, with the concept of being this buff, macho, blonde man who goes up to women and harasses them. I mean, no Japanese weeb could even dream of going up to a woman, let alone even talking to them. But in all seriousness, it's probably the Monster of the Week format that made the Japanese fall in love with the series. It's common in anime. There's also a ton of references to Japanese media hidden away in the show itself, such as the giant monsters destroying the town, the mechs in the show, the fact that Mojo Jojo is literally inspired by a villain from the live-action Japanese show called Spectre Man. Seriously, this is like based off of Dr. Gory. He's a mad scientist gorilla man from an ape planet. It's legit, look it up. So it's these tropes and the universal appeal of the show that made it popular worldwide, yet nobody could have ever expected the show to have been remade into an anime and Japaneseified, and it's called Powerpuff Girls Z. This is a weird one because the entirety of the show was remade from the ground up. Sure, we got our usual suspects like Professor Utonium, Mojo Jojo, the Rowdy Rough Boys, you know, everyone from the original series, but as familiar as they are, they're deviant immensely from the original. Like, for example, Princess Morbucks. She does exist in anime, but instead of being Princess Morbucks, she's Himeko Shirogane, and instead of being this superhero wannabe with a ton of money, you know, kind of like a parody of Iron Man, she actually does have superpowers, but only activated once her cat yells at her. It's like a perfect example of what they did to the characters in the anime. There's some familiarity with the old characters, but then it's just caked with all these new ideas and concepts that they end up barely resembling their original designs or concepts. Like, here, look at this character. Can you tell me who she is? Well, if you guessed Sedusa, you fucking cheated, because there's no way you'd be able to tell that by looking at her. Yeah, that's Sedusa's alter ego, Sakurako Kintoki. And you know something? If you're a Powerpuff Girls fan, then you might have some mixed reactions with the way they treated everyone in the show, because it was clear that Toei Animation either didn't respect the original show, or they loved it so much that they had to insert their own OCs, like the whole Princess Morbucks thing. Like, she's a cool and rich character in the original, but fuck that noise. How about instead of her being a rip-off Powerpuff Girl in this parody of Tony Stark, how about we just give her an afro and make our own, better, Japanese-ier character who's much prettier, cooler, and of legal Japanese age? Hell, even Professor Utonium has a Japanese-ass son with some Japanese-ass name and a robo-pooch. His son is the main reason why everyone has superpowers, actually. Remember Chemical X? Fuck that shit. Make room for our motherfucking Chemical Z, a newer, more Japanese version of Chemical X. And guess where this show takes place, actually? No, it's not the city of Townsville. It's just straight up Tokyo. But that's enough ragging on the Japanese adaptation. I mean, it's understandable. We've butchered some Japanese shows here in America, and we've made it super Western to accommodate our viewpoints, so it's understandable, if not somewhat jarring, that they made these decisions. But how is the show itself? Well, unfortunately, I've been way too busy with making Boosemas that I haven't actually been able to watch a full episode, but from the snippets I saw, I mean, it looks alright for a late 2000s anime, and it looks pretty much like any other magical girl preschool show any kid would be watching.
Oh, did I not mention that? Yeah, sorry. I forgot. The Powerpuff Girls, they're not actually the Powerpuff Girls. They're not like Buttercup, Blossom, or, you know, they got like Japanese names. They go to Japanese school, you know, whatever. And they transform into magical versions of themselves. That's the only way they activate their powers, through a magical Japanese transformation sequence. It's stupid, but it's an anime. What do you expect? While we're on the topic, it's pretty evident that that's where the budget went, as most of the show is incredibly cheap looking and stilted. It's bad, but considering the economy of anime at the time, I'm not going to blame them too much. Actually, no, I am going to blame them, because they're part of the reason why the anime crash occurred. Oh, and by the way, if you're curious, yes, this show is available in English dubs, but they were never aired here in the States, just in Australia, Southeast Asia, India, and Pakistan. Huh. Weird. You think that they would air it here and where the Powerpuff Girls originated from, especially when you consider Powerpuff Girls ended right around the time Powerpuff Girls Z started, so what gives? Well, no one can really say for sure, but a lot of people speculate that it's because it sucks. Fun fact, actually, this dubbing was done by Ocean. Yeah, the same guys who brought us over 9,000 Vegeta. Seriously, I'm not kidding. That's kind of funny. It gets even more jarring with the anime dubs because they just sort of treat the whole thing like it's actually Powerpuff Girls. Like, remember how I said it took place in Tokyo? No, this is now New Townsville. It's weird. And also the other characters, even though they have Japanese names in the original Japanese versions, now they have English names that accommodate to who they actually are. It's weird. I mean, this show, I gotta check it out, and I want to do a deeper dive into this. If you're super curious about this, I will dive deeper after Boosemas is over. But of course, you can check out the anime and all 52 episodes for yourself in either English or Japanese dubs. Check out what exactly changed for better or for worse for yourselves, but right now I gotta work on other videos, so yeah, you guys do the rest of the work. You tell me how it is. See ya. And I gotta tell you, out of every single Boosemas episode I've made, none of them have been as crazy as this one I'm going to be talking about. Now, let's preface this. If you don't know, there's this game by the name of Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, and it is a game that has gone down in infamy as one of the worst video games ever made, if not the worst video games ever made. Initially, it was made for the 3DO. Now, some people like to blame Plumbers Don't Wear Ties as the inevitable death blow to the 3DO. Others just see it as one of the worst games ever made, but it can't be denied that it is a masterpiece of shit. It was relatively unknown at the time. It was an obscure piece of media, but ever since the AVGN made a video on it, well, that infamy skyrocketed and everybody wanted their hands on more info of this game and the horrors behind it, what exactly happened behind the scenes, and who the hell thought of this idea in the first place. It quickly became the equivalent of The Room for video games. Part of the reason why so many people hated the game was the fact that it was so disgusting. Honestly, it was a slideshow full motion video, even though it wasn't full motion at all. Only during the first part of the game was it full motion. They cut around every single corner they could to just get a game running. It was a slideshow. It looked bad. It was controlled bad. It was a raunchy story. The acting was terrible. The story was atrocious. The music was grating. Everyone sounded like a piece of shit. It was horrible. It was boring. It was really not that great. Filters were used randomly for random photos, random scenes. Nothing about it made sense. It was incohesive. It was raunchy. It was disgusting. It made you feel like a pervert. It was degrading to women. It was misogynistic. I mean, there's so much wrong with this game. Is it any wonder that everyone hates it? Really? After a while, the well dried up. Nobody could really find any more info than what they had already found. There was this one alleged sequel to Plumbers Don't Wear Ties sent to me by a viewer, but it's just satire. It's not actually a real sequel to the game. It was just completely fabricated. It is an amusing article, but it's not real. It doesn't exist. But one thing that does exist that many people have thought never actually was a thing was a PC port to the game, which is what you're seeing right now. If you can even tell the difference. Yes, there's a PC port to this game. Nobody knew about it. Nobody even thought about it even existing.
But apparently Plumbers Don't Wear Ties does have a PC port. It was just forgotten about because of its infamy connected to the 3DO, and that is understandable. Even the AVGN only mentioned it as an exclusive 3DO game, and that's where most people learned about it. And when people caught a whiff of this possibly existing, of there being a second port of Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, then everyone just went haywire, but there was nothing that could be found. It was very much lost media for a long time. But then something resurfaced. There was allegedly a PC Gamer UK review of Plumbers Don't Wear Ties for the PC. That was the only shred of evidence that had existed of a PC port being a thing. However, that was since deleted and is totally lost to the annals of time, until of course a man by the name of Psychotic Giraffe uploaded to YouTube his discovery of the PC game itself, and him actually running the game on his PC, his Windows 95 to be exact. Psychotic Giraffe went through a weird investigation just to find this game. He saw the now deleted image of the game being reviewed on PC Gamer, and curious to find out more, he went on a hunt. Yet yielding any sort of results for Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, well, that would always get you the 3DO version, so instead he looked up the specs for the game itself, and lo and behold, he found that there was a library from Ball State University that still had the game in its collection for some weird reason. Unfortunately, because he didn't live in Indiana, he couldn't get the game himself, so he had to ask people online on Reddit to get the game for him. And someone did, eventually, and then they sent it to him, and immediately he set up a DOS box and loaded up the game. So now finally, the game is available to everyone on ROMs and emulators, and you can just download it now. You can play Plumbers Don't Wear Ties if you really want to, I guess. It's a strange piece of lost media, and you know, Boosemas is all about talking about gifts that you never received, and sometimes you don't want these gifts. But aren't you just curious to try out the PC port, the one port that nobody ever talked about, and try this game for yourself? I mean, aren't you just a bit curious? I mean, I sure am. Probably not enough to play this, but it is very interesting nonetheless. So kudos to Psychotic Giraffe for going through the effort and finding this game that nobody ever thought existed, nor anybody even asked for. So thanks, man. That was cool of you. Well, we're just about halfway through this whole Boosemas special, and I like to just sit down and give you a very simple one. This isn't one about a canceled game or a canceled unreleasing or a lost episode, lost season of something. No, this one's more about something that I personally didn't get, or rather, didn't get back. Now, all of these episodes have always been focused on you guys, what you didn't get, what you didn't receive, or what nobody got, in fact. But this is something that I will never ever get back, and those are my GameCube games. This is a very petty one, I suppose, but it's still very personal to me. When I was a kid, I grew up with pretty much every Nintendo console out there, as of late anyways. I had the Super Nintendo, I had the Nintendo 64, had a Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. But of course the next step for me was to get a Nintendo GameCube, and that's what I did. It was weird. I remember getting it with my dad when I visited Walmart with him. We were just going to go shopping and stuff, and I begged him, I pleaded him. That was my whole entire plan, just to go to Walmart multiple times with him and to bug him to get me a GameCube, because everyone around the block had one and I was the only kid that didn't. And sure enough, after the 48th time I went to Walmart with him and begged him and pleaded him, yes, I got the GameCube, and my first game was Melee. And I just fell in love with the game. I fell in love with GameCube in general. Like, I already knew what it was. I saw everyone playing with it, and they all had these awesome games, and there was just so much potential with the GameCube in the library. And of course, even though looking back now, you'll find that everyone hated the GameCube at the time, and it is considered one of Nintendo's black sheep. It didn't really sell that much. It really didn't. I mean, after the Nintendo 64 was selling already pretty bad, the GameCube was just a step further into the poor sales department. Nevertheless, I loved it, and my library was steadily growing, of course, through the help of my mom and dad with their money and through the allowance that I gained for myself. I bought so many games. I probably had like over 18 games. I can't remember them all at the top of my head, but I had some pretty heavy hitters. You know, there's of course Super Smash Bros. Melee, along with Mario Kart Double Dash, Luigi's Mansion, one of the Mario Party games, I don't really remember which one. Def Jam Vendetta, Def Jam Fight for New York. I had Star Fox Adventures, which was pretty cool. I had the other Star Fox game as well. My favorite GameCube game of all time, Beautiful Joe. That was awesome. I mean, I just had a huge library, and I was very proud of it. Unfortunately, it all was swept away when my backpack got stolen. See, there's this thing that happens whenever I visit my family, right? I always put my games inside my backpack. And the thing is that I have all my GameCube cases still. It's in my old home with my parents right now. However, all of those cases have no games in them whatsoever because I put all my discs inside this little binder. And this binder had everything. It had it all. All 20 or so games of mine were inside those binders, and there were 2 of them, possibly even 3. I think the third one had my Xbox 360 games, but that's not until later. And one time while I was visiting my cousins, I had brought those binders because some of the games that I had were multiplayer, and I would play those games with them. However, one time, I don't know how it happened, but my backpack where I put both of these binders that had every single one of my games were gone. They were just gone. I put them down in the apartment. They were on the lobby floor of their apartment, and then when I went down to get them, they were gone. Missing. Just taken away. I don't know if somebody stole it. I don't know if somebody threw it away, but it's gone now. And that was, I don't know, maybe 17 years ago. It's been a while, and I have not seen those games ever since, and I have cried ever since then. Every single night after that for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks straight, I was begging to get them back, but they're gone. They are legit gone. And you know, thieves, when they steal shit, it's often very difficult to find out who they are. Even if you have like footage or you saw their face, you just can't find them. They're usually gone forever, and that's just what happened with this. I lost my backpack, I lost my games, and they're all gone. And now, you know, as an adult, I've always really wanted to rebuild my GameCube library, but that would mean getting a new GameCube, and that's very expensive. And then I was like, all right, well then I'll just get the games back. I already got the cases, I'll just get the games back. But the thing is that GameCube games are astonishingly expensive, like really, really expensive. And I even thought to myself, well, even if I were to get the games back, they won't be my games. They just won't be. They're gone. They're not embedded with the memories that I had with them. And you got to keep in mind, when I say expensive, they're so expensive. Oh my god. I mean, I don't know. They're all gone. Now, of course, many of you could say, dude, just get a Dolphin emulator and just play the ROMs and, you know, whatever. But yeah, I know that. And I know I can play them in 4K, 60 FPS now, and I got all this technology, and it's totally worth it. Thing is that it's physical media that I'll just never have, and that bums me out because that's part of my childhood that's gone now. And the point of Boosemas is the loss of something that you could have potentially had, right? And for me, I had that childhood, but I could potentially never get it back. Never. It's gone. It's a part of me that's totally just missing forever. Thankfully, I had good games, and I knew that I had built that library. And now I look at my library now, I look at Steam, I got like fucking over 200 games, and you know, I look at Switch and I got like over 30 games on that, like double the amount I had for my GameCube. You know, I have the Super Nintendo SNES collection. You know, I got all this stuff, right? And I even have a Nintendo 64 now. And I'm rebuilding that 64 library, and it's beautiful to think that I can finally do that as an adult, and I'm glad that I can do that. I'm fortunate about that. I'm really happy about that. That's the one thing I can see that I have accomplished. I actually have a home, I actually have games, and I can afford this shit, and that's awesome.
I just wish I had my GameCube games back. That's all. Sorry if this one's a bummer, but I just need to tell you a story. Somebody recommended I do Christmas stories, and this is the one that I thought was more personal to me than it could ever be about you guys. So, sorry if that's not something you want, but hey, hope you enjoyed the video nonetheless. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next few videos. Love you guys. Throughout both years of Boosemas, I often talk about reasons why projects are cancelled, and often it's related to overambition, low budgets, perhaps even too many projects taken up by one company, you know, etc., etc. But this would be the first time that I'll be covering a concept that was canned instead of an entire project, and today's focus will be on Persona 5's original backpacking ideas. You see, Persona 5 wasn't always going to be about the traversal of devious minds and the change of one's heart. No, actually, it was going to be about world travel. Now, not much has been stated as to how fleshed out this was or what the main characters were going to do. I mean, according to the director of the game, Katsuhiro Hashino, the concept of Phantom Thieves wasn't even put into consideration yet. It was supposed to shake things up from the previous entries, which have all centered around school life. The theme was more centered around self-discovery in this part, as opposed to the inner machinations deep within a person's heart. Things tragically changed, however, when the 2011 Tohoku earthquake hit Japan. Hashino felt that the need to explore Japanese society was necessary, and he redirected his feelings back to Japanese culture instead of that of the world. Not much info can be found on these ideas. In fact, there's barely anything to be found at all. Development started just around the time Atlus finished developing Catherine, and there is footage of Joker walking around what seems to be a test building for a hotel. Allegedly, this was supposed to be test gameplay for what was supposed to be the backpacking idea. Yet, this doesn't really make much sense, as the 2011 earthquake happened in, well, 2011, and they didn't start around 2011, maybe late 2010. This really isn't enough time to get a running alpha build up, especially considering they were building their own engine for the game. Plus, the characters in this version of the game already have their full models, which that can't be done in just a few months. They can't just come up with a finalized version of their model within just 2 months or 3 months of the project. But let's consider that this is alpha footage. They are using a design of Joker that's close to the final. Fine, sure, but the thing is that really debunks this is the fact that there is music playing underneath, which is the same music used in the final game.
どんな雰囲気かなっていうのをなんか確かめ、スタッフと一緒に確かめて、これもいいけどなんかどうなんだろうねと、なんか違うかもねとか、いろいろ雰囲気的に難しいよねっていうことで。
Listen, my point is, I doubt this is footage from that time. It was considered to be a backpacking game. I don't know. We may never see this idea fully realized, and Persona 5 Royal is most likely going to be the same as Persona 5, just with new additions, similar to what they did with Persona 4 Gold, so don't expect that idea to come back. But who knows though? Maybe, just maybe, Persona 6 will have this backpacking idea reestablished, but I doubt that. One can dream, right? Do you guys have any idea how frustrating it is to research some of the crap I find? Like, seriously, you really gotta see the pattern that I see when I research all about canceled games. And the one trend that I really hate the most is the one where game devs just straight up, flat out never tell you that a game is canceled. Seriously, that happens all the time. I'm not even kidding. It's like game devs are so ashamed of having to cancel a project that they'd rather people forget about it in the first place than announce that it was canceled. Maybe it's for image or for branding's sake, or maybe they do want to pick it up in like 20 years from now, but it's really annoying. And no game is more evident than the infamous and long forgotten Tekken Cross Street Fighter. And no, I'm not talking about Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which was already released years ago with middling reviews. No, I'm talking about Namco's half of the bargain, Tekken Cross Street Fighter.
It was announced on July 24th, 2010. Yes, nearly 10 fucking years ago, alongside Street Fighter Cross Tekken. The two projects were a joint venture by both Capcom and Bandai Namco in making a fighting game that was representative of the franchise's playstyle. So obviously Street Fighter Cross Tekken was a 2D styled game where the action took place on one plane, similar of course to Street Fighter, while Tekken Cross Street Fighter was a 3D game that took advantage of the entire arena, again mirroring Tekken's gameplay style. While Capcom ended up producing their side of the deal, Namco had a difficult time developing their project. See, the difficulty came in part with the Street Fighter characters. Other than Street Fighter EX, the main roster has never actually done a 3D game before, and one that suits the playstyle that one would expect out of Street Fighter characters. The translation over from 3D to 2D is far easier than 2D characters being adapted to a 3D plane, 3D dimension. There's a whole new layer of depth to add, and of course the Street Fighter boys have never seen that before. To further complicate things, the project started around the time the PS3 and Xbox 360 were considered current gen, yet once the PS4 and Xbox One were released just a few years later, the game had to be rebuilt for the next gen of consoles. So this halted the project for a bit, a project that was only 10% complete by the time of 2012 was around, according to Katsuhiro Harada, the franchise's director and producer. Then things got a little hairy when Street Fighter V and Tekken 7 were both released, and Harada didn't want to overshadow the two main games, so he put the game on halt indefinitely. Keyword halt, not canceled. This game isn't canceled according to Harada. The cards are still in place, but now in 2019, the man's just not sure if it's a good idea anymore. And he brings up some good points too, like just how relevant is the idea nowadays? The novelty of Tekken Cross Street Fighter started with the amusement of the idea that maybe Tekken characters fighting Street Fighter characters would be cool to watch, or maybe kind of goofy to watch. Yet we already saw that, and not a lot of people liked it. So this could be giving Bandai Namco cold feet. What if their game ends up being just as hated? What if it's just an utter failure and nobody buys it? The second main argument is that, well, fighting games, realistically speaking, don't last very long, so the effort would just be wasted anyways, even if people consider the game to be a great fighter. With games like Street Fighter V and Tekken 7, Smash Ultimate, Guilty Gear, Dragon Ball FighterZ, you know, the games that are currently in EVO's like playlist, and they're constantly being competitive and always updated. I mean, there's just simply no room for a new fighting game, especially that one that's based off of a crossover between Tekken and Street Fighter, which again are already mainstream games that get a lot of attention on their own. The game would ultimately die by the end of the year it was released, unless of course it was exceptionally good and something that needed to be played, but I doubt it. And you can't really blame Harada for not trying. The dude himself said that he has the heart and mind to go into the grind again and begin production all over again to get this game done. Hell, he even asked on Twitter whether or not people are interested in seeing the game still, with people unsurprisingly saying yes. Yet you can't argue his logic. Even though people are saying that they would absolutely love to see the game, that doesn't necessarily translate to sales. The game just might not do well, and nobody's really craving for a new crossover game by Tekken and Street Fighter. Hell, they'd rather probably just see Namco cross Capcom 2, if anything. For now, the only thing we've got left are weird slides of Ryu in 3D and this crummy promotional art. Maybe someday, but right now, there are fighting games that are currently released and are struggling to maintain an audience that totally need your support. So go out there and support them, you know, like watch them on Twitch, support them on their YouTube channels, support your favorite player, support your favorite team. I mean, there's a lot out there already that you can watch, you can enjoy, you can consume. The honest truth is, there's just no point in crying over spilled milk that isn't even there. last week I talked about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure's Super Nintendo game that never saw itself released here in the States. Now I'll be talking about the rest of the content that was never released here, or even in Japan for that matter. Side note, I won't be talking about the mobile games that were unreleased because I feel like literally every IP ever made in Japan has had some sort of Japanese mobile game. Unreleased JoJo mobile games or exclusive Japanese JoJo mobile games don't really seem too special because literally everyone has done it. I mean, hell, even No More Heroes has Japanese exclusive mobile games. I mean, come on, really. Maybe we'll just do a compilation of mobile games never released here before, but for now, let's talk about some JoJo stuff, starting with the JoJo movie that Araki supposedly hated. Yes, there was a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure movie that never even saw home releases, animated by Studio APPP. Jesus, why so many P's? The same guys behind the Stardust Crusader OVA. The film was released in theaters on the 25th anniversary of Hirohiko Araki's career as a mangaka. The movie differed greatly from the manga, and one of the more controversial changes was the omission of Speedwagon. Yeah, he's not in the film, like, at all, even though he was pretty important in the first well, whatever. But here's the real kicker. Apparently, a comedy duo known as Speedwagon were in the film, but they didn't play as Speedwagon. They played as Dario Brando and Wang Chen. That's a goddamn kick to the face. The powers of Heyman were also barely explained. Dio's motives were made unclear. A lot of plot points don't really make sense because the filmmakers just didn't explain exactly why they should make sense. It was just a mess. This made the entirety of the movie just confusing for audiences, infuriating for fans, and allegedly hated by Araki. Overall, it was received poorly and is often thought as the reason why it was never released outside of theaters. Of course, the most popular theory is that Araki doesn't want anyone to watch the film as he reportedly loathed the film itself, but I couldn't really find any evidence of him saying that he hated it. In fact, I get mixed reports of people saying that he both hated it and people saying that he enjoyed it. So the true reason why it was unreleased is still unknown. Right now, you can find parts of the movie on YouTube, and some fans have been able to reconstruct the film as best as they could to match up with the original, well, what they think the original might have looked like, while also adding sound effects to match up with the scenery. But don't expect any sort of cohesive dialogue or anything like that, because this is not the original film, this is not the original animation, and it's also not the original sound, so they're just ad-libbing with what they think is happening. This is still considered a lost film overall. The parts that were reconstructed are publicly available through APPP, but the dialogue and the audio is, like I said, still missing. The film could potentially be lost forever, and we may never be able to find the true film. One thing that is fortunate, however, is the tie-in video game that this movie had. That video game, of course, being JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Phantom Blood for the PS2. Released in 2006, allegedly this intro to the game was also the opening scene to the movie, and both products were released to coincide with JoJo's 20th anniversary. Now, it's hard to say whether or not people like this game in comparison to the universally disliked movie, but judging by the game footage and the fact that the game is just a beat 'em up, it's probably safe to assume it wasn't terribly good. There's only so much you can do with beat 'em ups in that era until it got repetitive and boring. And 3D brawlers just weren't that great during this time period. One cool thing about the game, though, is that it follows the manga near perfectly, with a few slight alterations or omissions. So at least any diehard fan would be happy to play this, right? Like, for story's sake. Also, the game has dozens of characters to play as, but that doesn't necessarily make them interesting to play, just that they're available to play. Like, you can play as the brats that beat up Jonathan within the first part, or you can play as some random claw zombie. It's not really terribly interesting, but if you want to, you can play as them, you know? Of course, because JoJo was still very obscure here in America, and, well, everywhere else around the world, what with us falling in love with Naruto and One Piece at the time, it was never released here in the States. That's not the only game that was unreleased in the States, however. We still gotta talk about one more game, the far more popular and well-known PS2 game, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which was released in 2002, and was basically the same thing as Phantom Blood's game, except with stands, of course. More people have talked about this game than anybody else has on Phantom Blood, and probably because Phantom Blood is fairly obscure, and also infinitely worse. I mean, let's face it, even though not everyone loves Part 5, it is far more popular than Part 1. Sorry, but it's sadly the truth. Much like Phantom Blood's game, it's a shot-to-shot retelling of the story, more focused on head-on 1v1 action as opposed to the brawler-style action Phantom Blood had. The game also spiced things up with puzzle sequences here and there, and this game also has, like I said, stands, which make the fights far more interesting as it makes the battles less about how hard you can punch a character or how long you can beat them up for, but rather how to avoid their hazards or how to adapt to their stand abilities, which is cool, especially when you're fighting someone like Formaggio and his stand Little Feet, which turns Narantia smaller just like in the manga. There's also this dynamic little thing called the secret factors, which is based off of the manga's battles. Basically, they're just side objectives or interactive elements that help the players during the fights. Think of them as like a cinematic way to defeat enemies or weaken enemies, and this sort of feature was like kind of seen in the SNES game with JoJo's Stardust Crusaders. You know, where you can initiate a move where you do the tactics move and you think about a way to beat them and then you do a critical. It's basically like that, except more cinematic. The visuals were also highly praised and loved by pretty much everyone, although it could be a bit nitpicky for me to say this, but the voice of Giorno is horrible. It's just a bad match.
あんたはいい人だからな。ギャングだけどいい人だ。あんたは薬をやっているこの少年を見てショックを受けて一瞬攻撃をやめた。ですよね。
Wow, that doesn't fit his body at all. All in all, the game was never released outside of Japan, which is a shame because Capcom actually had plans to release it in North America and Europe. Oh, and get this bullshit. Apparently here in North America, they were going to call it JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. However, in Europe, they were going to call it JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, like Giorno's Bizarre Adventure in Europe, under the request of Araki, by the way, who wanted to stay true to the European/Italian origins of Part 5. Sure, after many delays and E3 showings, the game was silently cancelled. Thankfully, the game was translated sometime last year, probably due to the sudden interest in Part 5 because, you know, the anime came out during that time. So, if you're willing to find the game and to patch it in English, then you're more than welcome to play the game itself. So that about wraps up all the games that were never released here, and like I said, there are the mobile games and probably some obscure cameos that I haven't mentioned from other games that weren't released here, but I'm not going to mention those. But the mobile game stuff, I might be interested in covering, just not now. So, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll see you later. Love you guys so much. Goodbye.
Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the little marathon that I had compiled for you. Come back tomorrow because we'll be starting the actual Christmas special. And unfortunately there's not going to be a really big intro or anything like that, but there will be some interesting lost media that I hope you guys will enjoy. Don't expect it to be like Traumathon where it's like 8 to 16 minute videos. These are going to be a lot shorter and hopefully I can get you something entertaining. I love you guys a ton. Stick around, there's going to be more. And I hope you guys enjoy the gifts you never got. Love you all a ton. Goodbye.